The Thorned Veil. Chapter 1. The blood moon above Erethan. The night that the blood moon rose over Erethan, every raven screamed. From the high towers of the obsidian keep, their cries echoed down to the forested valley below, a sound like the tearing of silk and bone. The air itself seemed to bleed. The moon hung low, swollen, and veined with red light that spilled across the blackened spires and silver lakes of the realm. Elara stood on the balcony of her father's citadel, the wind twisting her hair into a pale storm. She was supposed to be dressed in mourning for the fallen soldiers at the border, but she had never believed in mourning for strangers, not when she was the one bound by their blood. Below her, the ritual began. Torches ringed the courtyard, held by masked priests in robes the color of rot. At their center, a chained stag, black-eyed, breathing shallowly, struggled against its bindings. Every year, the blood moon demanded a sacrifice. Every year, the priests of Erethan whispered that the blood kept the veil from tearing the invisible barrier that divided their realm from the shadowlands beyond. But this year, the stag was not enough. The high seer's voice carried through the chill. A life of royal blood must seal the veil anew. Elara's hand froze on the marble balustrade. She had been warned this might come, that her lineage was cursed, that the veil's hunger had followed her mother's death. The curse of the first queens, who had bound darkness itself to their hearts to gain power. But hearing it now, spoken aloud under the bleeding moon, felt like the end of everything she had pretended not to know. She turned from the balcony. Her chambers were lit only by candlelight, trembling against the walls. On her table lay a dagger, silver-edged and engraved with runes that pulsed faintly, a gift from the old witch who had once served her mother. "If the blood comes for you, child, better it be your choice." A choice. The door burst open. "Princess Elara," Sir Kale's voice, breathless and sharp, the captain of her guard eyes like storm glass, armor black with frost. He had never addressed her by title unless danger was real. "They're coming for you. The seer's order is absolute." For a moment she saw it all reflected in his eyes. The courtyard below, the priests chanting, her father's empty throne, the kingdom rotting from within. "How long?" she asked. "Minutes." Elara grabbed the dagger and slid it into her sleeve. "Then we run." Kale hesitated, his jaw tightening. "You'll be hunted. The order carries the king's seal." "The king's seal is forged by fear," she said, stepping past him. "And I've no intention of dying to keep an old curse alive." They fled through the narrow servants' corridors, past walls damp with centuries of secrets. The citadel seemed to shift as they ran, staircases turning longer, shadows deeper. The veil was stirring, even the air buzzed with something unnatural, a hum that pressed behind her eyes. They reached the stables, where the night smelled of hay and cold iron. Kale mounted a black mare and extended his hand to her. Elara hesitated only a heartbeat before taking it. As she swung up behind him, the first bells began to toll from the watchtower. "Ride," she whispered. And they did. The wind tore at them as the gates crashed open. Arrows hissed through the night. One clipped Kale's shoulder, another buried in the mare's flank, but the creature ran, driven by terror and blood. The forest swallowed them whole. For hours they rode without speaking. The crimson glow of the blood moon bled through the trees, painting the mist like spilled wine. Only when the sound of pursuit faded did Kale slow the horse. He turned to her. "You should have stayed. They wouldn't have killed you quickly." Elara laughed, low and bitter. "You think I fear pain." His gaze softened for a moment, almost pity. "I think you fear the truth, The veil was made from your bloodline. You can't outrun what's inside you. Hey, Ino Yenny, then I'll find a way to break it, she said. But even as she spoke, something inside her stirred a whisper, faint but ancient, a voice that wasn't hers, coiling through her thoughts like smoke. You already have, little queen. You broke it the moment you fled. She flinched, clutching her head. The whisper faded into laughter. Kale dismounted, scanning the forest. We'll make camp here. They found a clearing beside a dead stream. The trees leaned close, as if listening. Kale built a small fire while Elara sat apart, staring into the embers. Her dagger lay across her knees, glowing faintly in the red light. Who taught you to fight? Kale asked after a while. My mother, she murmured. Before she was burned for witchcraft. He looked up sharply. I thought she died in childbirth. That's what my father wanted the court to believe. Silence. Only the crackle of the fire, the soft hiss of wind. Elara's eyes drifted to the moon above the treetops. It was closer now, enormous and throbbing like a wound. Do you know why they call it the blood moon, Kale? He didn't answer. Because it remembers. Every drop spilled under its light feeds it. Every lie told, every betrayal, every curse. She looked back at him. And tonight, it remembered me. The shadows moved. Kale was on his feet in an instant, sword drawn. The air around them grew colder. From between the trees, figures began to emerge, cloaked in black, faces hidden, eyes gleaming like coal. The hunters, Kale hissed. The seer sent them. There were 6, then 10, then more. Their footsteps made no sound on the earth. Elara rose, dagger in hand. The runes along its edge blazed red. She felt the hum again, not outside, but within her veins. Power, wild and ancient, clawing to be free. Kale struck first, cutting through the nearest hunter with a sweep of his blade. The creature didn't bleed, it dissolved into ash. Screaming, Elara followed, moving as if guided by memory, not her own. The dagger sang through the air, a silver blur, and when it met flesh the world seemed to shatter. Light exploded crimson and gold, and every hunter froze mid-motion. For a heartbeat, silence. Then they collapsed, lifeless. Elara staggered, trembling. The glow faded from her weapon. Kale caught her before she fell. His hands were warm, grounding her back to reality. You wielded the veil's power, he whispered, awe and fear entwined. That's forbidden magic. I didn't call it, she said, voice shaking. It called me. He looked at her for a long time, then spoke softly. Then perhaps the blood moon didn't come for your death, princess. Perhaps it came to awaken you. It's tame. The wind shifted. Somewhere deep in the forest, a howl rose low and mournful, like a god remembering its own grave. Elara turned toward the sound, and in that moment, under the bleeding sky, she understood one terrible truth. The veil was not what kept the darkness out. It was what kept her in. Chapter 2. Ashes Beneath the Crown. Morning came reluctantly to the forest of Arathan. The red moon had sunk, leaving the sky the color of old parchment. Mist crawled low, coiling around the roots of black pines, and the silence that followed the night's battle felt unnatural, too heavy, too still. Elara awoke to the sound of running water. Kale was already awake, washing the blood from his sword in the stream that had found life again after years of drought. Its surface mirrored the faint shimmer of dawn, but no bird sang above it. The world seemed to hold its breath. She pushed herself up, every muscle aching, and found the dagger lying beside her, the runes along its blade dim now, like dying embers. When she touched it, a pulse of warmth answered her skin, almost affectionate. The same whisper brushed her mind. "You are awake, my little queen. The veil remembers you." She closed her eyes. "Go away," but it did not. Kael turned, his expression unreadable. "You spoke in your sleep," he said quietly. "What did I say?" "It may the dia mabra, names, not yours, not mine." He hesitated, then added, "And you were glowing." Elara looked down at her hands. The skin there seemed paler than before, almost translucent, as though something beneath it was shifting, crawling light trying to break through. She clenched her fists. "It's the curse," she said flatly. "My mother warned me. The blood of the first queens doesn't die. It sleeps until called." Kael sheathed his blade, the sound of steel soft against leather. "Then we find someone who knows how to silence it." "Do you know anyone who can silence blood?" she asked bitterly. He didn't answer. Instead, he mounted the mare, limping now, but still defiant, and extended his hand again. "We can't stay here. The hunters will regroup." Elara took his hand, letting him pull her up. "Where do we go?" "To the ruins of Nerith. There's a witch who lives beneath them. She deals in curses." She arched a brow. "You trust witches?" "No," he said. "But she hates the crown more than I do. That should count for something." They rode through the forest as the sun clawed weakly at the mist. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the crack of branches and the occasional distant roar of something neither human nor beast. The forest changed as they went deeper, trees turning from pine to pale ashwood, the ground beneath them soft and gray. Once, Elara thought she saw movement between the trunks, a figure watching, cloaked in shadow, but when she turned, there was nothing there. By midday, the ruins of Nerith appeared through the fog, skeletal towers leaning like broken teeth, their stones veined with black moss. The air smelled faintly of iron and rain. "This was the first city of the queens," Kael said. "Before the veil was made." Elara dismounted slowly, her boots crunching over shattered marble. "Before they bound the darkness to themselves," she murmured. "Before they became gods." "And Kael said nothing, but his hand never strayed far from his sword. They entered what remained of the main hall. Statues lined the walls, or what was left of them, women carved from obsidian, eyes missing, mouths open as if mid-scream. The ceiling had collapsed long ago, letting shafts of white light pierce the gloom. In the center of the hall stood an altar. Upon it, a single mirror, tall, cracked, and framed in silver vines. It did not reflect them. Elara stepped closer despite Kael's warning hand. Her reflection shimmered and vanished, replaced by another face, a woman with hair the color of smoke and eyes like molten gold. "Welcome home, daughter of the veil," the reflection said. Kael drew his sword. "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "Names are for mortals, but if you must call me something, once they called me Nymera." Elara's heart lurched. "That name is forbidden. The first queen, the one who made the veil." Nymera's reflection tilted her head. "And yet, here you stand, carrying what remains of me. How ungrateful of history to forget." Elara swallowed. "Why are you here?" "Because you broke the chain, little heir. You fled the sacrifice. The veil stirs, and with it, the truth." "The truth?" "That your kingdom was built not to keep darkness out, but to feed it." The mirror shivered. "Every generation, A royal blood must die to keep the shadow satiated, and now it hungers again. Elara stepped back, shaking her head. No, my father said the sacrifices protect us. Your father is a coward wearing a crown. The words cut like knives. He feeds the beast to buy peace, but peace born of blood is never peace at all. Kale stepped between them. Why should we believe you? You're a shade in glass. Nymera laughed softly, and the mirror cracked further. Because, Captain, you've already seen the proof. The hunters who came for her weren't alive. They were made bound souls of those who died under the veil's curse. Your own brother among them. Kale froze. Liar, he was. Say, ask your heart. His hand trembled. Elara saw it, the pain flicker across his face like a storm. Nymera leaned closer to the glass. Bring her to the hollow below this city. There lies the heart of the veil. Break it and end the curse. But beware, her golden eyes darkened. The heart beat still. The mirror went black. Elara exhaled, dizzy. The hollow, she whispered. That's where she wants me to go. Kale's jaw tightened. We're not following ghosts. She's not a ghost, Elara said quietly. She's the blood that made me. He turned to her, anger flaring. And she'll unmake you the same way. Every legend that ends in the hollow ends in death. Oh, it me. Then perhaps death is the only way to end it. Their gazes locked, hers fierce, his desperate. Something shifted between them, not just fear or duty, but something older, deeper. She saw it then, the thing he never said, that he'd die before letting her walk into that dark alone. Elara stepped closer. Why do you stay, Kale? He hesitated. Because I swore an oath to my father. To you, he said, voice raw. Silence. The wind sighed through the ruins, carrying with it the scent of rain and ash. Elara looked away first. Then keep your oath, Captain. Follow me into the dark. They descended through a staircase half buried in stone. The deeper they went, the colder it grew, until their breath came in white clouds. The walls pulsed, faintly veins of black crystal that seemed alive. At last, they reached the hollow. It was vast, a cavern whose ceiling vanished into shadow. At its center rose an obelisk of obsidian, carved with runes that pulsed like slow heartbeats. Around it lay bones, hundreds, perhaps thousands, from sacrifices past. Elara approached, her footsteps echoing. The dagger in her hand trembled, humming in resonance with the obelisk. Kale's voice was barely a whisper. Elara, stop! But she couldn't. Something inside her, something ancient, drew her closer. When she touched the stone, the world fell away. She stood in darkness, endless, living darkness. From it emerged a figure tall, cloaked in smoke, eyes burning crimson. So, it said, voice like thunder beneath the sea, the air awakens. Elara tried to speak, but the air burned in her throat. Who are you? I am the other half of your blood, the one your queens caged and called a god. The veil, she breathed. Yes, it smiled, and the smile was terrible. Your mother made the same mistake you are making now. She thought to control me. She thought to save you. But there is no saving what was born to bind. Elara stepped back. I won't be your vessel. You already are. Did you not wonder why your power answered blood before it answered will? Her heart pounded. I can end this. I can destroy you. The veil laughed. Destroy me and you destroy yourself. The world shook. Light exploded. Kale's shout pierced the darkness, distant, fading, and then everything shattered. When Elara opened her eyes, she was lying on the cavern floor. The obelisk was cracked, bleeding light. Kale knelt beside her, his face pale, his sword drawn against shadows writhing along the walls. "What happened?" she rasped. "You touched it," he said, "and it woke up." The ground trembled again. From the fissures, darkness spilled, not smoke, but living shadow, moving with hunger. Kale pulled her to her feet. "We have to go." But the dagger in her hand was glowing once more, brighter than before. The runes blazed with fire, and she heard that voice again, not the Veil's, but her mother's. "End it, Elara. End what I could not." She looked at Kale, tears and fury in her eyes. "If I die, run. Don't you dare." But she was already moving. She plunged the dagger into the heart of the obelisk. The explosion tore the air apart, light and shadow colliding in a storm that devoured the world. The bones turned to ash. The runes screamed. The Veil howled a sound of rage and release, and then there was silence. When the dust cleared, Elara stood alone amid ruin. The obelisk was gone. The hollow was gone, and in her chest something new pulsed, not the curse, but a heartbeat that wasn't hers. Kale's voice broke the silence. "Elara?" She turned. He was there, bloodied but alive. He stared at her as though seeing a ghost. "What have you done?" he whispered. She looked down at her hands, black veins spreading beneath her skin, light flickering in her eyes. "I didn't break the veil," she said softly. "I became it." Chapter 3. The Crown of Ash and Fire. The first sound Elara heard when she woke was the heartbeat, not hers, slower, deeper, resonating through the stone beneath her palms. It felt like the earth itself was breathing. The world above had changed. The sky, once a bruised gray, now pulsed with veins of crimson light, as though the blood moon had never left but had bled into the heavens. The forest that surrounded the ruins of Nerith was withering, leaves falling in silent cascades, branches curling like burnt parchment. And in the distance she could hear the screams of the dying. Kyle stood a few paces away, his sword planted in the ground, his eyes on her. He looked exhausted, his armor dented, his cheek cut open. But the way he looked at her wasn't fear, it was disbelief. "Elara," he said hoarsely, "tell me that's still you." She rose slowly. The air around her shimmered faintly, warping the light. Her reflection in the pool beside her wasn't the same. Her hair had turned silver white, and her eyes burned faintly with gold fire. "I don't know," she said, her voice low, "but I remember everything. Every soul the Veil ever swallowed. Every queen who made the same choice." She touched her chest. Beneath her skin, the pulse of that other heart matched the earth's rhythm. Kale stepped forward. "You broke the curse. The obelisk is gone. You did what the witches never could." Elara looked past him, toward the forest. "No, I freed it. That's not the same as I am." The ground trembled again, and the whisper returned, colder now, sharper. "Do you think you can bear the weight of me, little queen? You were born from my hunger." She closed her eyes. "Get out of my head. I am your head." "Elara." Kale's voice cut through the noise. "We need to move. The city's collapsing." He was right. The ruins of Nerith were crumbling, sinking as though pulled into the earth. The altar shattered behind them, the mirror reduced to dust. Together they ran, climbing over fallen stone and twisted roots until the sky opened above them once more. Outside, the air was alive with chaos. From the east, smoke rose from the plains. Flocks of ravens turned in spirals above a distant village, and on the horizon, a red glow burned fire or magic. Elara couldn't tell. She stared. The veil's energy. It's spreading. Kale followed her gaze. Then we find someone who knows how to contain it. And if it can't be contained, then we make sure you survive long enough to learn control. She turned to him, a bitter smile on her lips. You think you can protect me from the darkness when it lives inside me? He met her eyes without flinching. I've protected worse things. That earned him the faintest laugh. It didn't last. They rode west, following the old king's road toward the highlands of Erethan. The path was cracked, lined with ancient stones carved with runes that flickered faintly now, like warning beacons. Every mile took them closer to the capital and to the throne that had betrayed her. As dusk fell, they reached a small settlement built among the ruins of a watchtower. The villagers were pale, thin, their faces smeared with ash. When they saw Elara, they bowed not out of reverence, but out of instinctive dread. One woman stepped forward, clutching a child to her chest. The air burns, she whispered. The ground cries at night. Is it true the veil is broken? Elara opened her mouth, then stopped. What could she say? That she had become the thing they feared? That their prayers had been answered in the cruelest way possible? It's changing, she said instead. But I'll stop it. The woman's eyes were hollow. You sound like your mother. Before Elara could ask, the woman turned away, disappearing into the crowd. Kale approached her side. They'll follow any voice that promises hope. Then let's make sure I'm not lying to them. They found shelter in the ruins that night. Kale built a fire again, though the flames seemed to recoil from Elara's presence. Shadows clung to her skin like ink drawn to gravity. She sat apart, staring into the darkness. Her mind echoed with whispers, not one, but hundreds, layered and shifting. Voices of the dead queens, of the souls the veil had devoured. We are you. You are us. Stop, she hissed. Kale turned from the fire. What? Nothing. She forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You should sleep. He studied her for a moment longer. I'll sleep when the world stops trying to kill you. Then you'll never sleep. He smirked faintly. I never did. Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, she said, Why did you serve my father? Because I thought he wanted peace. And now? I think he wanted power. Peace was just the word he used to make it sound holy. Elara's fingers traced the hilt of her dagger. He'll come for me, or he'll send the seer again. It is, let him come, Kale said. I've killed his shadows before, but you can't kill what's part of me, she whispered. Kale met her gaze, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. Then I'll kill anyone who tries to take you from yourself. Something in her chest cracked, not pain, but something dangerously close to longing. She looked away before it could bloom. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because I might believe them. A long pause. The fire sputtered. The night deepened. When she finally slept, her dreams burned. She stood again in the darkness, but now she wasn't alone. Nymera stood beside her, her golden eyes dim. You think you can control the veil, Nymera said softly. But it's not a weapon. It's a hunger. It devours until nothing remains. Elara clenched her fists. Then I'll starve it. Nymera smiled sadly. It feeds on what you love most. Before Elara could reply, the dream shattered, replaced by screams. She bolted upright. The fire was dead. Smoke filled the air, and through it came shapes armored men, their sigils painted crimson. The king's soldiers, Kale was already fighting. Steel met steel in the narrow ruin, sparks flying. "They found us!" he shouted. Elara reached for her dagger, but before she could draw it, an arrow struck her shoulder, pinning her against the stone. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the chaos. The soldiers surged forward. One raised his blade to strike and then stopped. Frozen mid-motion, the shadows erupted. They poured from Elara's wound like black fire, coiling around the attackers, devouring sound and light. The men screamed as their armor melted, their eyes turning to ash. Kale staggered back, horror and awe in his face. Elara, she couldn't stop it. The darkness flowed from her like breath, answering pain with hunger. The child's words from the village echoed in her skull. The air burns, the ground cries. When it was over, the world was silent again. Every soldier lay dead. The ground was scorched in a perfect circle around her, the stones still smoking. Elara fell to her knees, shaking. "I didn't mean to." Kale knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders. "Listen to me. You have to control it." "I can't," she whispered. "It wants blood. Then we teach it to want something else." She looked up at him, tears streaking her soot-stained face. "And if I can't?" He hesitated, then reached out, brushing a strand of silver hair from her cheek. "Then I'll remind you who you are until it listens." The moment hung between them, fragile, dangerous. Then, somewhere beyond the forest, the bells of Arathan began to ring. The king was calling his army home. Kale's expression darkened. "He knows. He'll march soon." Elara rose, the firelight glinting in her eyes. "Then let him march. The throne was forged in my family's blood. It's time I took it back." Kale's gaze held hers for a long time. "And what will you do when you stand before him?" She smiled, not cruelly, but with a grief so deep it could kill. "I'll show him what his peace has cost." The wind rose, carrying ash into the sky. Behind her, the dead lay still, their faces turned toward the stars. For the first time, Elara did not feel fear, only resolve, cold, sharp, and bright as a blade. Far away, the blood moon began to rise again, and this time it bowed to her. Chapter 4. The Seer's Mask. The road to Arathan was lined with shadows that were not of the forest. Elara and Kale rode in silence, the mare's hooves striking sparks from the cracked stones. Behind them, the forest retreated into fog, leaving a world stripped bare as if the veil's awakening had bled the color from everything. "Elara," Kale said at last, his voice low, almost cautious, "we can't ride blindly into the capital. The king's forces will be waiting." She glanced at him, eyes smoldering with gold light. "Then we don't ride into the capital. We take the city from within." He blinked. "You mean infiltrate?" "No. Claim it." Kale's hands tightened on the reins. "You think you can march into the throne room and survive?" "I don't think," she said. "I know. The veil is with me now. I can feel its will. It bends for me, responds to me. I've only glimpsed its power, but it's enough to topple kings. And destroy the people too," Kale muttered. Elara's jaw clenched. "No, not destroy. Free. Free from the lies. Free from the blood debt. That's the difference between us. I don't want vengeance. I want justice." He said nothing, but his eyes betrayed the storm within the part of him that feared her, and the part that would follow her anywhere, even into damnation. By dusk, they reached the outskirts of the capital. The city walls rose like jagged teeth against the blood-streaked sky. Arathan had not yet noticed their approach. But the sentries along the battlements were restless, sensing the shift in the air, the pulse of the veil that now walked beside Elara. They dismounted at a ruined gatehouse, crouching in the shadows. Below, the streets stretched like veins, empty, haunted by the ghosts of merchants and soldiers alike. The capital itself had become a maze, the king's rule fractured by fear and superstition. "We'll need allies," Kale whispered. "Not allies," Elara corrected. "Those who owe me blood, willingly or not." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean the remnants of the witches?" She nodded. "And some old soldiers. Perhaps even the seer herself, if she can be persuaded to fear me rather than my father." They slipped through the side streets, the city unnervingly quiet. Every window, every archway seemed to watch them. The veil pulsed faintly in her chest, a heartbeat that resonated through the cobblestones. "They sense you now," it whispered. "They will come." Elara ignored the warning. "Let them." In the shadow of the cathedral, they found their first contact, an old witch named Morrigan, her robes tattered, her hair silver as frost, her eyes sharper than any blade. She didn't greet them, she merely studied Elara, as though weighing her soul. "You've returned," Morrigan said, voice like dry leaves, "and the veil is awake in you. I wondered if it would claim a child this quick." "It's mine," Elara said. "I didn't ask for it, but I won't let it be used to feed the throne anymore." The witch's gaze softened a fraction. "Few have the will to survive it. Fewer still can bend it to themselves. You might have hope, little queen." Kale's hand hovered near his sword. "Then we don't waste time. The king will be ready for us soon." Morrigan nodded. "You're right. But beware the seer. She wears a mask of loyalty, yet she dances for blood. I once tried to bind her. Even then, she saw shadows I could not. She will know what you are now, and she will use it." Elara's teeth clenched. "Then I will meet her on my own terms." Morrigan raised a gnarled hand, and a small bundle of herbs fell into Elara's lap. "For control, use them sparingly. One slip, and the veil will become a devouring flame." Elara tucked the bundle into her cloak. "Thank you." "Do not thank me," Morrigan said, stepping back into the shadows. "The veil has a claim on you, not I. And remember, power is a crown of ash before it is a sword." The night was silent as they moved deeper into the city. Elara could feel the pulse of the veil in every stone, every shadow. The hunger was subtle but insistent, tugging at her mind, a reminder of what she had become. They reached the palace walls without detection. Guard patrols moved like shadows, unaware of the living darkness beside them. Kale set up a small map of the palace in the alley, whispering strategies. "We strike at the seer first," he said. "If she knows you walk with the veil, she will try to claim you before your father even sees you. And if she refuses, then we force her hand." Elara's lips curved into a ghost of a smile. "I'm beginning to like that approach." They infiltrated the palace under the cover of night, moving through corridors lined with flickering torches. Every step was measured, every shadow a potential threat. Elara felt the veil's presence inside her, vibrating in resonance with the dark magic woven into the palace itself. They reached the seer's chambers, a tall room draped in crimson curtains, mirrors lining every wall. Candles burned in a circle around the central figure, the seer herself. Her face was hidden beneath a golden mask, her hands tracing runes in the air. "Ah," the seer's voice echoed, calm yet sharp. "The child of the veil arrives at last." Elara stepped forward. "I am no longer your child." The seer laughed softly. "Power like yours cannot be severed. It will bind you, whether you will it or not. What dot is on? You're wrong, Elara said, dagger in hand, heart racing. I am the veil now, not its prisoner. The seer tilted her head. Then prove it. With that, the mirrors shattered simultaneously, releasing shadows that surged toward Elara like living storms. The veil responded, dark tendrils erupting from her skin, twisting and cutting through the shadow, shaping it, bending it to her will. Kale watched in awe and fear as Elara moved like a conductor of the apocalypse, every step precise, every gesture commanding the darkness. When the last shadow dissolved, the seer removed her mask, revealing a face older than time, lined with regret and obsession. Impressive, she said, but control is fleeting, child. And the king, he knows of your awakening. He will come. Elara's eyes glowed brighter. Then let him come. I will meet him and anyone else on my terms. The seer studied her, then slowly bowed. I will teach you what I can, but beware the veil hungers, and it hungers for those you love most. Kale stepped beside Elara, hand brushing hers. We'll survive it, he said softly. She looked at him, gold fire in her eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of warmth, of trust. We will, she whispered, and outside, the first tendrils of dawn broke over the palace, casting long shadows that twisted like serpents across the walls. The battle for Erethan had only begun. Chapter 5. Lessons in Hunger. The seer taught her to breathe first. Power answers rhythm, she said, pacing in a circle of chalk and ash, the same way a tide answers the moon. She touched Elara's sternum with 2 fingers, the pressure cool as river stone. You are both moon and ocean now. You must learn which to be. Candles ringed the floor, their flames steady though no windows were open. The chamber below the palace, the red catacombs, once a vault for queens, was cut from the rock that predated the city. Here the walls whispered in a tongue older than grief. Here the old blood had been kept in jars and bowls and silver veins that fed the rites of the crown. Elara obeyed because she had to. She inhaled until her ribs ached, exhaled until the edges of her sight went dark. The second heartbeat stirred, deep as thunder beyond a mountain range. It wanted, it always wanted. Again, the seer murmured. Elara breathed again. The veil pressed against her bones like a creature testing a cage. Kale stood at the threshold where the chalk lines ended, one shoulder against the stone. He watched without blinking, the way one watches a horizon for storms. The seer had made him swear not to cross the circle, not because Elara would hurt him, she had insisted she would not, but because the seer believed she could not help it if the hunger woke too quickly. You're thinking of him, the seer said. Elara's eyes snapped open. I'm thinking of not tearing this room to pieces. That too, the seer allowed, but it listens when your mind hooks on a name. Elara shut her eyes. She did not think Kale's name. She thought of the mare's breath in winter. She thought of her mother's hands, smelling of hemlock and smoke. She thought of Nymera's golden eyes. Dimming in the dream, she thought of a city that had never known a bell rung for a death under moonlight. Good, the seer said. Now pull it back, as if drawing thread through a needle. Elara reached as if into her own chest. The second heartbeat receded, not pacified but leashed. It left a cold heat behind, the way a brand leaves its shape and flesh. When she opened her eyes, the candles flared and dimmed. The chalk line at her feet had cracked, as if the stone had flexed. How long will this hold? Elara asked. How long can you hold yourself? the seer replied. She knelt, tracing a sigil with black salt. Listen to me, child of the veil. Hunger is not evil, it is directionless. Left wild, it devours. Lead it, and it becomes a river that drowns cities, Elara said. A river that can also power mills, turn wheels, carry ships. You must learn where to cut and where to dam. Elara looked over the seer's shoulder to Kale. He had not moved. But when she met his gaze, something softened in his face. He had the look of a man standing in a doorway between worlds, willing to be crushed if it meant keeping them both open. Again, Elara said. Teach me again. The lessons were not only breath. The seer took her to the mirror hall, where the palace gathered its secrets and multiplied them. She taught Elara to cast her shadow through glass, to step into reflections and emerge 2 rooms away. She taught her to listen for the hollowness inside men, the empty pockets where fear nested, and how to press a word into that emptiness until fear broke into obedience or fury. Never leave the word, the seer warned. If you plant something there, you must return for it. Seeds grow into forests, and forests are hungry too. They practiced on a rat. Elara hated it. The rat's mind was a knot of twitching nerves and hunger. When she pressed a thought into it, sleep the edge of its small life brushed her skin. It obeyed. It felt like drowning a thimble of water and calling it mercy. She released it, and it fled the instant it could move. Good, said the seer. Then you still bleed. Bar. At night, Elara dreamed a corridor without walls. The corridor ended in a gate made of bone and winter. On the gate hung keys, each forged from a memory she could not bear to open. Her mother's last look, the moment before the mirror went dark, Kale's voice when he said he had sworn to her, not to the king. In the dream, the keys cut her palms and left no blood. When she woke, the bells of Arathan beat like a heartbeat too close to her ear. The city had begun its war rhythm. Trumpets answered from the north. The king was moving soldiers through the streets, not toward the gates, but inward. He meant to hem her in, to cauterize the palace if he must. Morrigan met them in a colonnade whose stone lions had long since lost their teeth. The old witch moved like a stiff wind, her breath ragged. They dragged the river with iron nets at dawn, she said without preamble, brought up a boat's worth of boys, masks of rotted cloth, hunters. Kale's jaw worked. He's calling them in daylight? He calls them whenever he chooses, Morrigan spat. Daylight only makes the lie kinder to look at. Elara felt something cold coil beneath her ribs. How many? Enough to make a wall of bodies, Morrigan said. And the seer's crystal says their captain wears a scar in the shape of a hook at his mouth. Kale flinched. That was a knife, he said after a moment. My knife. Elara, Morrigan said quietly, you will meet what you fear today, and you will be asked to feed the veil what it wants. Decide now how much of yourself you can afford to spend. Elara looked at her hands. The gold light burned faintly under her knuckles. In the last week, she had ended 3 squads of soldiers, a clutch of shadow spawn, and the obelisk that had anchored the curse. None of those things had made her shake like this. We won't meet them on the street, she said, hearing the steadiness come back into her voice, like a blade sliding home. We meet them where I can control the ground. Kale glanced at the seer. The mirror hall? The king's chapel, Elara said. She could feel the place in the map of her bones. The glass is old there. It remembers when it was sand. It will walk where I tell it to. The seer's mouth tilted, almost proud. Then let us give the hunters a pilgrimage. They waited on the chapel steps as the sun sank behind the city's slate roofs. The stained glass windows, saints, queens, and beasts bound under crowns were deep as wells. Light gathered inside them like water before a spillway. Cale checked the knives at his forearms, the one at his spine. He had cleaned the old blood from his sword, but not the nick along its edge where he had deflected Elara's dagger on the first night they fled. Some wounds were useful to keep intact. "Elara," he said. "If it is him, it will be," she said. "Then do not kill what I must." She turned to him. "I will not take your choice." He nodded once, like a man accepting a bargain with the sea. The gates of the chapel opened inward as if by a sigh. They stepped into cool, incense-sour air. The pews gleamed dark. The altar brooded under weight of relics that had fed on belief for centuries. The saints on the walls, women with crowns of thorns and bones, watched with eyes that had not blinked since their paint dried. "I'll set the lines," the seer said, kneeling to pour ground mirror and salt into the cracks of the stone. Morrigan stood at the transept, whispering to the iron in the hinges, asking it to be stubborn. Elara walked up the center aisle and placed both hands on the altar. The glass listened. It began as a hum in the windows, then a tilt. Shapes inside the stained panes leaned, faces shedding their fixed suffering to become fluid. The greens of old forests grew deeper. The reds of martyrdom glowed like fresh cuts. Elara asked them for their memory, and they gave it the heat of furnaces, the weight of sand, the wind over a shore when the world was still learning the word measure. She built a corridor of reflections between the nave and the door. She made a shore inside the glass where footsteps would falter. She opened a place for the river to run. When the hunters entered, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. They wore no armor that shone. Their leather was the color of old smoke. Their faces were masks of stitched cloth, jawlines too narrow for living men. Their captain stepped forward, his eyes visible through the slits gray, like river stone. A scar tugged the corner of his mouth into a hook. Cale's breath left him without sound. "Ronan," he said. The name shook loose ears. "Brother." The head cocked. The gray eyes flickered. "Cale." The voice was a rasp pulled through gravel. "You were supposed to keep your oath." "I did," Cale said. "Just not to the same man." The captain's gaze slid to Elara, and in it lived a hunger that was not his own. "Little queen," he said, as if tasting bitter wine. "The moon wants your bones." "Then it can starve," Elara said, and the glass in the windows sighed. The first charge broke on the invisible shore. Hunters tripped mid-stride as if the air had become thick, their feet sinking into reflections. Cale moved like a blade pulled by magnetism, cutting where the river eddied, thrusting where the current met stone. Elara raised her hand, and the stained saints stepped down from their frames, their halos becoming blades of light, their eyes burning. But the river wanted more. It tugged at her wrist, at her heart, at the place where the second heartbeat sat like an egg beneath her sternum. "Let me," it whispered, but it did not feel like a request. "Open, and I will finish your work." She opened it a fraction. Shadows poured from her finger bones like silk. They looped around hunters' throats and tightened. They slid under masks and filled mouths that did not breathe. The chapel dimmed, as though a cloud had passed over the sun of its lamps. "Elara," the seer warned. Elara pulled the shadows back. They resisted. The fraction gaped wider. Hunger yawned with teeth. Her chest hurt where the second heartbeat quickened, ready to run over the world, to drink it as if from a broken jar. Cale cried out. He had reached Ronan. Their blades crossed, the scarred mouth lifted, not into a smile, but an old memory of one. "You were slower than me," Ronan said. "That was before you were dead," Cale said, and drove his sword into the gap at the collarbone. It should not have worked. Hunters did not die by steel alone. But Ronan stumbled. Cale's eyes flooded. He did not pull the blade free. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around his brother as if holding the position of the sword was the only thing keeping the world from falling off its axis. "Let him go," Morrigan hissed at Elara. "If you flood, you'll drown them both." The river wanted Ronan's pulse. It wanted the last true thing in him. Elara stepped off the altar. She walked to the brothers, the battle narrowing to a single point, the chapel reduced to the sound of breath and the bright, thin sound of glass complaining. She stood before Ronan and put her palm against his cloth-wrapped cheek. The fabric was cool. The thing inside it recoiled from her heat like mold from sunlight. "Ronan," she said, "do you want to die?" Those gray eyes flicked to the left, the way they had when he'd lied to their mother about stealing pears, when he and Cale had raced and one had always held back to keep the other near. Cale's jaw trembled. Ronan swallowed. The cloth moved and did not. "I want," he said, voice raw as a scraped knee, "to stop waking." Elara turned her head and exhaled. The breath was a thread of cold. She threaded it into his mouth where the mask gaped. She followed it with a word she had not known she knew, a word that meant untie and unmake, and here is the key you asked me to keep. The hunger surged. It slammed against her ribs. It crashed at the gate inside her dream and rattled the bones in the winter door. She tightened her hand. The shadows pulled back like a tide obeying a shore. The word untied. Ronan's body sagged. The thing inside him howled a sound like hot sand under rain, and then there was nothing but a man's weight in his brother's arms. Cale went to his knees, taking his brother with him. He held Ronan's face between his hands and said his name as if the city were inside it. Behind Elara, the remaining hunters shrieked and fled, some dissolving where the Mirror River cut their heels, others simply breaking like masts under wind. The chapel settled, the saints climbed back into their panes, their halos cooling to circles of colored fire. Elara did not move. Her hand shook, not from the tug of war, but from the moment she had almost opened all the way. In the space between let and stop, she had seen everything she could be. If she stopped pretending, she did not want to taste what power tasted like. The seer touched her elbow. "You chose the riverbed," she murmured, "not the floodplain. Remember this choice until your bones do." Elara drew in a breath she did not trust and looked at Kyle. He was crying without sound. He had pressed his forehead to Ronan's, and his mouth moved around a prayer that had no God left to catch it. "Take him," Elara whispered, "before the king sends fire." They carried Ronan into the crypt. Beneath the crypt, a place where the palace kept its secrets from itself. Morrigan closed the doors with iron and vinegar. The seer drew circles of bone dust that smelled like winter on a battlefield. Cale laid his brother on a slab that had once been an altar. Ronan's face, no longer masked, was thinner than the memory of a blade grass in drought. "Will he wake?" Cale asked without looking up. "If I anchor him," the seer said. "But anchors are double. Tie him to the shore and something else ties there with him. Better a crossing." "Crossing where?" Cale rasped. Elara stepped forward. "Let me," she said. "I owe him peace." Cale's head snapped up. For a heartbeat he was only a soldier again. "No, trust me," she said, and meant, I will not take the last of him too. He swallowed and nodded. It broke something in her the way a locked door breaks when its key finally turns in it after years of rust. Elara placed her hands on Ronan's temples. His skin was cool as river rocks at dusk. If there is anything left you wish, she told him softly, say it now. The gray eyes opened. They were not Hunter's eyes anymore. They were a man's, holding on to a rope that had frayed to 2 threads. Tell Ma, he whispered, not to Elara, but to Kyle. I learned to make the boat not leak. Kale laughed, one sharp breath that broke into a sound that was not laughter at all. She knew, he said. She always knew. Ronan's eyes turned to Elara. He seemed to see her then, not as queen or river, but as a woman standing in a room where the living undid the work of the dead. Don't let them make you a mouth, he said. I won't, she promised. He closed his eyes. Elara spoke the word again, the one that meant untie, and guided him through a door she built out of breath and salt, and the memory of 2 boys running along a riverbank where the reeds whispered in the afternoon wind. The gate in her dream did not open. It did not have to. Some doors were small enough to fit in a human chest. When it was done, Ronan's chest did not rise. The room listened as if fame might be born in silence. Kale put his hand over his brother's, then your over and under, the way they had stacked palms before counting to 3 and leaping from the dock. His lips did not move. His eyes did all the speaking. He turned to Elara. He was empty with grief, and still he was gentler than anyone had ever been to her. Thank you, he said. She nodded. She could not say you're welcome to a thing like that without dying of the wrong kind of pride. The seer cleared her throat, practical as always. We have less than an hour before the king lights the palace from the outside, she said. He will call it a purification. Fire always makes a liar look holy. Morrigan spat blue on the stones. Let him light it. We'll teach the fire what to fear. Elara smoothed the blanket over Ronan's shoulders. She closed his eyes with a thumb and forefinger and felt the wild truth that she had not drowned today because she had loved harder than she had wanted. She turned to Kale. I cannot promise to be safe, she said, but I can promise to choose. Kyle stepped close. The crypt was cold, their breath visible. The old air smelled like rust and old prayers. He lifted a hand and touched her jaw, like a man survives a winter and is not sure if the thaw will be gentle. That small touch carried more trouble than any kiss she had ever imagined. Then I will be your witness, he said, voice low. When you forget, I'll remind. When you hunger, I'll stand between you and the world until you're yourself again. And if the day comes when you cannot, don't finish that, she said. He held her gaze. I must. If you cannot, I will do what you would ask me to do if you were me. She swallowed. The second heartbeat slowed, as if to clear space for this one human conversation. Then I will never ask, she whispered. They did not kiss. They did not touch more than that one hand to her jaw. The pact was a colder thing, and then a warmer one. The ground shuddered. From above, a roar. The first lash of the king's fire struck the palace roof. The old cedar beam sang pain down the walls. Smoke began to seek the corners like a cat. The seer gathered her skirts. Up, she said. To the throne room, not away from it. You want the city? Take its mouth. Break the teeth. Elara looked once more at Ronan. Guard him, she said to Morrigan. The witch nodded. I have been scaring death longer than you have been chased by it. Elara and Kale climbed into heat. The corridors stank of pitch and fear. Servants ran like ants toward a broken hive, some carrying plates and some carrying babies. The palace breathed in smoke and coughed it out black. At the high doors to the throne room, 2 lines of soldiers had already formed. Their faces were open books, loyalty written in one, hunger for survival in another, the king's lies written neatest of all. Elara did not slow. She raised her hand. The veil leaned forward. She did not open it. She tilted it, the way one tips a pitcher without pouring. The doors swung inward, with a sound like an old sea splitting its back. Inside, the king sat on a throne carved from the trunk of the first ironwood felled to build Erethin. His crown was too heavy for his head, but he wore it as if it had fused there. He looked thinner than fear had remembered him. He looked like a man who had counted his prayers and found them all the wrong kind. "Daughter," he said. She crossed the floor. The firelight licked the pillars and showed her every crack in the marble. The veil moved in her like breath in a sleeping beast. She stopped at the first step. "Father," Elara said, "do not call me that in front of the dead." He considered her. The men behind him shifted like horses smelling rain. "You broke the seal," he said at last, "and now you bring the storm home." "I am the storm you sold our blood to," she said. "I'm merely collecting the debt." His mouth twitched. He had once been beautiful, and men like that mistake people's forgiveness for their own goodness. "You won't kill me," he said. "You need me to hold what you cannot." Elara let the river show in her eyes. The second heartbeat smiled, a small, cold thing. "Watch me learn," she said. The seer's hand on her shoulder was brief permission or warning. It was hard to tell. The king's gaze slid to Kale. He smiled then, a snake remembering which hole housed which mouse. "Oh," he purred, "you kept your favorite." Kale's blade whispered as it left the scabbard. The king lifted a hand. A dozen archers raised bows. The air tightened. It was a moment that would either become a song or a tally. "Elara," the seer whispered, "choose your river." Elara breathed in, and the hunger lifted its head. She breathed out, and the hunger lay down and watched her. She looked at her father, at his crown, at the men who would die because he refused to be anything but the mouth of a lie. She looked at Kale, whose grief had left him cleaner than before, and at the corridor of glass inside her that led to a gate she refused to open. "I choose the city," she said. She raised her hand, and instead of pulling darkness, she pulled light. Not the thin gold of candles, but the white light inside glass before it cools, the light of sand learning to hold a shape. The stained windows all along the walls blazed. Saints stepped down again, but not with blades. They carried ropes of light and bound the king's archers' hands. The archers' bows clattered. The king surged to his feet. "Witch!" he spat. "Demon!" Elara climbed the steps until she stood one below him. Smoke crawled down the ceiling, testing the seams. "No," she said. "Daughter." She put her hand to the crown. It burned. It had been seasoned with sacrifices and supplications. It bit her palm like a ring of small teeth. The second heartbeat throbbed. Pleased, she closed her fingers around it and lifted. It did not come free. Not at first. But she had miles of river behind her now, and a city's worth of eyes learning her name right out of the smoke. The crown gave with a sound that was not metal, but bone. The king staggered. Without the crown he looked smaller. The room suddenly had corners he could not see into. "Elara," Kale said softly. Not a warning, not a plea. A name on a dock before a jump? She turned the crown in her hands. Its teeth dripped a little. She could feel the weight of women who had worn it, and believed the lie before they built it into a different truth. Every point of it fit the shape of her hunger, like a lesson fits the shape of a skill newly learned. Elara smiled, and none of the saints looked away. "This city," she said, and her voice filled the hall like the tide fills a throat of river, "will unlearn your name." She set the crown on the empty step, and the palace, which had been holding its breath since the first bell rang, exhaled. Chapter 6. Oathfire. The crown lay on the step like a shed jawbone, smoke pressed low, tasting the gold and the stone and the sweat of frightened men. In the breath between one bell strike and the next, the city hesitated, then shifted, as if a great body turned in sleep and learned the shape of a new dream. Elara did not lift the crown again. She turned from it and faced the hall. The saints in the glass watched, their painted mouths closed around the words they had been made to hold for centuries. The soldiers stared, knuckles white on hilts they had not raised. At the far end of the room, a girl in a soot-black dress clutched a string of beads until her palms bled pearl. "My name," Elara said, and the smoke carried it up to the rafters and down into the cracks of the floor, "is Elara Nymerith, child of the first binding, breaker of the hollow. I am not your pyre, I am not your lie. If you stand between this city and its hunger, you will not be unmade. If you offer it another body, you will answer to me." The men looked to their king. He was smaller, without metal. He seemed to be listening for a voice that had long since stopped speaking to him. When he found none, he straightened careful, the way a man sits up in bed after a fever and pretends he is not afraid of the next sweat. "Guards," he said. The word stumbled. "Arrest." No one moved. Morrigan appeared in the doorway with her hair unbound and a strip of linen tied over her mouth against the pitch. She held a brazier like a priestess and a cudgel like a long memory. Behind her, servants poured in women with wet rags to beat flames, boys with bowls of sand, old men with pails. The palace, its lungs full of smoke, had gathered its own blood and come to clot. The seer's voice threaded the hall. "You will not use fire to wash your hands," she told the king. "There is ash enough in your nails." Elara met his eyes. They were sea-gray and very tired. "You can leave," she said, "alive, with an escort. You will not be hunted, but you will not speak for this city again." He had Oz. He stared at her. For a moment, something almost human moved under the mask of rule, hurt perhaps, or the memory of love turned sour under the weight of years. Then the old shape returned. "You are a vessel," he said, "a mouth the dark will drink through. You will drown them and call it rain." Elara lifted her chin. "Then watch me keep my teeth." He laughed, and the sound was a cough. "You can refuse to wear it," he said, nodding at the crown, "but you cannot refuse to be it." "Take him," Kale said quietly. Two soldiers stepped forward, not with the king's insignia, but with plain leather, the kind of men who had learned order long before they learned oaths. They did not draw chains. They did not touch the king more than they had to. They led him like one leads a man from a burning field who does not know which way is not fire. Elara let him go. The hunger rose, surprised. He was blood of her blood. The river remembered his taste. She pressed it down until her ribs ached. There would be no crown built of a father's death. Not for her, not for the city she meant to teach how to say its own name without spitting soot. "Bar the doors," she said to the servants. "Open the shutters. Break the windows if you must. Give the smoke a mouth that isn't ours." They moved as if they had been waiting all their lives to be told the sensible thing. Latches fell. Lances cracked glass. Air came. thin and cold and edged with the smell of wet stone, as several someones hauled up buckets from the old cistern under the western stairs and sloshed the floor until flames skittered like startled fish. The saints dimmed. Their light had never been theirs. It had always been what the glass chose to keep. When the room could be breathed again, Elara descended the steps and found Cale where he had been since she touched the crown, half a pace behind and a little to the left, like a shadow that refused to be cast. "Ronan?" she asked. "In the quiet," he said. His voice was rough. "Morrigan drew sigils for his crossing. She says even the hunter's ash remembers the shape of a man if you speak it softly enough." Elara touched his wrist. He closed his fingers around her thumb, a small human anchor in a flood that did not care for boats. She could have rested there, but the city pressed at the doors, and the hour had too many teeth. "Come," she said. They did not leave the palace by the grand stairs. Elara took them down through the servants' galleries, the arteries of the keep, and out a postern door into a courtyard where rain had begun to stipple the black flagstones. The air tasted like iron coins and wet rope. Arathan rose on all sides. Towers like the vertebrae of a sleeping beast, roofs like folded wings, alleys narrow and full of listening. Somewhere, a bell changed its mind and began ringing not alarm but assembly. Word outran them. By the time Elara and Cale reached the red fountain, the square was thick with bodies, merchants with ash on their sleeves, washerwomen with their arms bare and wet, children with knees scabbed by the city's stone. Men who had been soldiers stood apart and together, hands idle in a dangerous way. A boy stood on the rim of the fountain and hissed at the marble fish until water coughed out in a low, obstinate stream. The square felt like a held breath. It smelled like rain and new fear. Elara climbed the fountain. The water caught at her boots like cold tongues. She looked at the faces before her and saw 1,000 histories, each stubborn, each hungry. She waited until even the babies had stopped mewling. "You've been told a story," she said. "That darkness waits beyond the world, and only your blood keeps it from coming in. It is a good story for a crown that drinks and calls itself thirsty. It is a bad story for a city that wants to live." She pointed east, where the cathedral's windows had gone pale in the rain. "The veil is not a wall. It is a river. Your queens bound it and fed it and forgot to ask it what it wanted. I have asked. It wants shape. It wants to move and mean something." "You can make a river mean anything," a man called. He had the hands of a wheelwright, stained with the black of must and oil. "You can make it grind or drown." "Yes," Elara said. "That is why I will not be the only one to speak to it." A murmur. The kind the city makes when it recognizes a word that might be the door to a larger room. Elara spread her arms. Rain slicked her sleeves, pasted her hair to her cheeks. The gold light in her eyes flared, then steadied. The second heartbeat rolled, wary. "I will open a covenant," she said. "Not a sacrifice, an oath fire. Here, now. Those who bind themselves to this city to serve it, not rule it, will be heard by the veil and held by it. Your word will be a key. If you break it, the key will turn in your own bones." The seer appeared at her elbow, as if she had been standing there all along. She set a clay bowl on the fountain's rim and lit it with 3 breaths. The flame she made was not bright. It was the color of old milk and tasted in the back of the throat of snow. Rain struck it and slid off like oil. "Speak carefully," the seer said, without looking at anyone in particular. "This is not a priest's game. The fire will remember what your tongue forgets." The first to step forward was the wheelwright. He dunked his hand in the fountain and held it over the bowl. The wet ran down his wrist. The fire touched what fell and made no smoke at all. "I am Garin, son, of no one who mattered," he said. A ripple of laughter. He smiled, quick and crooked. "I turn wood and iron. I swear to turn them toward mending of wheels, of gates, of neighbors. If I charge more than a man can pay, may the hinge of my jaw rust shut. If I leave a widow's cart lame, may my own feet find mud and no road out of it." The oath fire leaned toward him. Something small and heavy clicked in the air, the sound of a key seating in a lock. Garin stepped back, looking faintly ill and very proud. A washerwoman came next. "I am Briska, who keeps water sweet," she said. "I swear to carry what can be carried and to refuse what should not be mine. If I speak a lie over a basin, may my teeth ache like winter. A boy, 12 at most. I am notched because I cut my hand and kept the scar. I swear to run messages true. If I slack, may my legs cramp when I need them." His ears were red as he spoke, but his words did not shake. A dozen more, 100. Names the city had not known it knew. Work the crown had not learned to honor, because honor could not be counted at tithe. The fire grew no larger. It felt, if anything, like a mouth becoming full and patient. Kael stood very still. Elara looked down at him. Rain silvered his lashes. He had not yet stepped forward. For a moment she wondered if he would. Then he climbed onto the fountain and faced her. "Careful," the seer murmured, but the warning was a smile wearing a mask. Kael put his hand over the flame. He did not flinch. "I am Kael of the riverbank," he said, "son of a boatwoman who taught me to read the wind before the letters, brother of one who crossed. I swear to be the blade that turns, not the blade that drinks, to stand between her," he nodded to Elara, "without saying her name, and the thing that would make her forget she has a name of her own. If I fail, may this city turn its face from me and never turn it back. Here's me." The oath fire lifted to him. It touched his palm. A bright, small pain bit him. He let out a breath that might have been a laugh and might have been a prayer. Elara swallowed. "I will not bind you," she said. "Your choice is already a chain." "I know," he said. "I chose it." He turned his hand and showed her the mark the fire had left. It was not a burn. It was an absent skin paled in the shape of a river bend. "Your turn," he said, quiet enough that only she and the rain could hear it. Elara looked at the bowl. The hunger stirred, uneasy. It preferred obedience to covenant. It liked blood better than grammar. She felt it lift and settle. Like a big animal heeding a small one it had decided for now to tolerate. "I am Elara," she said into the square, into the rain, into the old stone that had known older names. Daughter of those who bound what should have been asked. I swear to listen first. I swear to feed no fire that asks for a throat. I swear to turn this river toward wheels and mills and clean mouths. If I forget and open the gate that has no door, if I hunger more than I love, may the city take back my name and leave me only the work." The oath fire moved like a creature watching a hand. It touched her. The second heartbeat rolled, startled, and then, slowly, it set itself to a new rhythm. Not tamed, tuned, the square exhaled. Someone began to cry. Someone else began to laugh. Both sounds made sense. A woman handed Elara a loaf under a cloth. The loaf was burned on the bottom and perfect on top. A child took Kael's fingers and put them on his own head, as if asking to be counted into some tribe that had just been invented. Morrigan leaned to the seer. "It will hold for some," the seer said. For today. She rubbed a thumb along the bowl's rim, drawing a ring that did not smudge. For long enough to teach the city its mouth, a horn blew low, ugly. On the far side of the square, a knot of men in crimson cloaks shouldered through the crowd. They moved like fish who believed the river belonged to them. At their center, a priest with a scar like a bent nail across his scalp. He carried a black box. Elara felt the air tighten. The pyrolitany, the seer hissed. He means to sing your name into ash. The priest climbed the fountain without asking. He set the box down and opened it. Inside lay a book bound in skin, its clasp hooked through with a braid of hair the color of old straw. He lifted his voice. It was not beautiful. It did not have to be. By the blood of the first, Elara moved. She did not touch him. She touched the box. The oath fire leaned at her elbow like a hound that knew only two tricks and had been told to wait by the river, she said softly, to the book, to the hair, to the clasp that had forgotten it could open without hurting something. Untie. The clasp fell open. The book flipped of its own accord, not to the curse he had meant, but to a page her mother had once written and hidden with ink of milk and smoke. Words bloomed when rain struck them. If you read this, you have survived me. The old songs can be sung backwards. They are only ropes braided the wrong way. Elara's breath stuttered. For a heartbeat she smelled hemlock and kitchen ash, and the salt on her mother's wrist where she had held Elara in the dark during a storm and taught her the names of the thunder. She looked up at the priest. You may sing, she said, and there was no kindness in it. But if you sing a burning, your own tongue will taste coal until it cannot find words for water. He swallowed. The scar on his scalp gleamed dully. He shut the book. The men in crimson backed away, step by step, until the crowd swallowed them and made them smaller than they had been in their own minds. Rain eased. The square softened. The fountain hiccuped and became a proper flow, not generous but reliable. Elara climbed down at last. Her legs shook with the fatigue that comes when a long-held weight is not put down exactly, but learned. Kael kept close without touching. The seer walked on Elara's other side like a rumor that would not fade. Rest, Morrigan said. You've put a bit in a god's mouth. Let your hands be empty or they'll forget how to be. Elara nodded, and the world wobbled and steadied. They reached the palace through streets that were less narrow than they had been in the morning. That was a trick the city played. It changed the width of its alleys, not by stone, but by the story a body carried through them. Servants bowed to Elara and did not cross themselves. A boy with a candle stub led them along a corridor where rivulets of water made the floor look like glass. He whistled a tune that sounded like the bell's new voice. In the throne room, the crown still waited on the step where she had left it. Someone had tried to move it and found their fingers unwilling. Elara stood before it. Kael said nothing. The seer said nothing. Rain tapped the broken windows like a polite thief. At dawn, Elara said, I will hold court in the square. Not here. They will bring their disputes. I will listen. If the veil has ears, it can be taught what justice sounds like. And at dusk? The seer asked softly. Elara bent and lifted the crown. It did not bite this time. It was heavier than shame and lighter than grief. She turned it, studying the teeth, the old metals soldered to new, the small seam where some queen, perhaps Nymera herself, had once pried a single gem loose and put it back wrong to see if anyone noticed. No one had. At dusk, Elara said, we go to the river. For what? Kael asked. She smiled, tired and bright. To teach it a new song, He looked at her as if she were a map he could finally read without asking directions of anyone living or dead. His hand found her sleeve. The touch was a question she would answer later, when answers did not cost so much. She set the crown not on her head but on the arm of the throne, where it sat like a tamed animal, ears pricked, teeth covered. Outside, the bells of Arathan rang again, neither alarm nor assembly, but something like practice. The city was learning its mouth. The river rolled somewhere under the stone, listening for its name in the rain. Elara closed her eyes. The second heartbeat steadied to the measure of her own. Hunger shifted, not sated, not asleep, wary, like a wolf lying near a fire it had chosen to trust because the night had too many stars. Tomorrow, she whispered, to it, to the saints, to the roof beams that had not fallen, to the square that would fill with words, we begin. He won. Chapter 7. Rivermouth. Dawn emptied its pockets over Arathan and found mostly ash, a few coins of sunlight, and a city learning how to use its tongue. Elara stood at the red fountain with the oath fire burning low as a coal under milk. The square had swollen to twice its size, though the stones had not moved. The city made room the way a chest does for a deeper breath. Merchants unrolled canvases to keep the mist off wares they could not afford to lose. A roper set out coils like sleeping snakes. On the fountain's lip, a baker arranged misshapen loaves as if they were saints. Even the ravens had found perches that looked like listening. The first case was small and ordinary, which was the point. A girl with salt-burned hands shoved a man forward by the elbow until he stumbled into the open. "He promised me a place on his barge," she said, chin lifted as if she could stretch herself into age. "Said he'd take my baskets upriver if I packed them dry, but he loaded the butcher's meat with my eels and took coin for all." The bargeman scowled. "The butcher paid more." "Then you should have told me," the girl said. "I could have sold on the bank. My eels turned to rot when the meat bled." Murmurs. Heads tipped. The city loved meat and eels. It also loved a promise kept. Elara did not look at the seer for counsel, nor at Kale, who watched with the stillness of a hound learning a new command. She looked at the girl's wrists, rope-burned, not just salt. At the man's boots, dry as if he had walked nowhere before dawn. At the river's surface, visible down the avenue through the arch, wrinkled like a brow thinking. She tasted the veil in her chest as one tastes the weather there, but not all there is. "Do you know how to mend nets?" Elara asked the girl. "Yes." "Do you know how to balance cargo?" "Yes," she said again, insulted. "My mother ran a boat." Elara turned to the bargeman. "Do you know the oath fire?" His mouth twisted. "I know a fire is a fire. Is a lodi." "It is not," the seer said mildly. "This one keeps accounts." Elara let the smallest ribbon of shadow curl up from the bowl and lick the air like a cat. The man swallowed, which was a kind of truth. "Here is judgment," Elara said. "You will pay her the coin you took on her baskets. You will take her as hand on your next 3 runs. If she says you cheat your scale, the oath fire will feel where your words do not weigh what they are worth, and it will fix your tongue until it learns." She glanced at the girl. "And you will keep your rope dry." The bargeman grunted, glared at the bowl, and dug in his pouch. The coins rang like a low bell in the morning. The girl counted without hurry, then nodded and set her palm over the oath fire, which rose to taste the salt on her skin and seemed satisfied. "Next," Elara said. They came in a current. A mason who had mortared a wall crooked to cheat a neighbor's Sunday, a midwife accused of herbs that turned away babies. She had turned away death. And the city, being the city, accepted that after the seer took the oath fire in 2 hands and asked it to show which words had smoke in them. A guild of tanners wanting an exemption from river levy because their vats made bad water. Elara fined them by making them drink what they had poured until their bellies learned what their mouths would not hear. They gagged. They agreed to dig settling pits. The square laughed, then grew sharper, because laughter is a kind of law, too. Kale moved around the edges, quiet, effective, thinning knots before they became rope, taking knives from sleeves with the grace of a man who had learned to count fingers by how quickly hands moved. Near midday, a noble in rain-bright silk shouldered forward with 2 men in crimson. "Lady," he said, drawing the word out like wire, "cousin to your father's line, keeper of 3 mills, owner of half the North Road, I bring a petition signed by 30 names. We require title, not to serve, to stand beside." Elara looked at the names. Half were inked by scribes, the hands too pretty for farmers. She lifted her gaze to the man's face. "You require?" she asked. "Yes," he smiled. It was a beautiful arrangement of teeth around nothing at all. "We will support your reforms, but the crown must rest in a circle, not on a head." He tapped the paper. "Titles are bridges history can walk across without getting its feet wet. The oath fire is new," Elara said. "It needs stones, not bridges." He spread his hands. "Then build with ours." The square went still in that particular way cities do when they smell an old game wearing a new coat. Elara did not reach for the veil. She reached for the river inside the word need. "You will serve in public," she said, "without masks. You will be named for the work you do, not the land you claim. Mill keeper is a title if you keep mills. Road warden is a title if your men stand in mud with the poor when the rains come and not only when the taxes due. If you want circles, stand in the square until you hear one." He blinked. "You refuse the houses?" "I refuse to let a table that fed on blood sit and call itself furniture in a new room." She nodded at the petition. "You can still knead that list into bread. Bring me work by dusk." His mouth tightened. He tried to look offended. He failed. The people were watching. The paper went into his sleeve. He bowed exactly as much as he had to and none more. The crowd exhaled laughter and relief. Garin the wheelwright shouted from the edge, "If he wants to stand in a circle, I'll draw one." A ripple of humor passed over the square like wind over grain. By late day, Elara's knees had the ache that comes when a body chooses to stand and keep standing. Her throat rasped. The second heartbeat kept pace, sometimes a measure behind, sometimes a measure forward. The last case came from a line that had waited without pressing. A woman in a cloak, mended so neatly it had become something more than its patches. She held the hand of a child who looked like he had grown more bone than skin during a long winter. The woman spoke as if her words had been counted and saved. "The hunters took my husband at the river. They left the boat. Can you," she swallowed, "can you bring him back?" The square swallowed with her. Elara stood. The world narrowed to the fact of this woman's mouth and the boy's hand. She had unmade one and helped him cross. She had quieted a captain into being a brother for one last hour. She could not pull men out of ash like bones out of stew. "I can make sure they do not take another like him," Elara said. The woman's jaw trembled. She held it still by will. "That is not the same." "No," Elara said, "it is not." She reached for the woman's free hand and for the boy's fingers with her other. The oath fire tilted. The veil stirred, wary, not with hunger but with an old habit of answering grief with flood. Elara did not open. She bent. "Come to the river at dusk," she said, and her voice found a shape that was both promise and warning. "We will sing." The woman nodded once, as if surviving had taught her the economy of movement, and stepped back into the crowd. The boy did not look away from Elara until the bodies moved like a tide and took him. "Dusk," Kale murmured, close enough that his breath warmed the curve of her ear. "You'll be exhausted. All race and matter flace." "I am now," she said. "Tonight I will be something else." He made a sound that, in a different world, would have been a laugh. "I'll fetch bread before you think you don't need it." He was gone and back with 2 heel ends and a slice that still had heat. She tore, chewed, sipped the thin beer a child offered her for free, pressed a coin into the child's palm anyway. The city had brought its own sacrament. When the bell marked the hour the dockmen had always used to shoulder rope in unison, Elara banked the oath fire and lifted the bowl. Its weight surprised her every time, lighter than logic, heavier than water. She looked at the seer. "You'll need more than your mouth," the seer said. "Rivers want a choir." "Then we gather one," Elara said. They walked. Not many ordered, enough invited. Garin came, wiping his hands on his apron. Briska came with a bucket as if a habit were a blessing. The baker came with a peel still dusted in flour, the boy Notch with a string of beads someone had given him, proud as a king. The noble in silk trailed them at a distance, hawk-eyed, counting favors or losses. It was hard to tell which. The river lay where it had always lain, which is to say, where it chose to lie against the shape of the world low today, with mud like cracked bells along the banks and a smell of iron and old leaves. The piers leaned in, listening. Boats bumped each other as if trading gossip. Far down, the bargeman had lashed cargo that would not slip because a rope with a new oath had been tied. Dusk pressed its belly to the roofs and purred. The first bats wrote poems in beetle ink above the water. The veil in Elara's chest went quieter than it had been all day, the way a child goes very still when it wants to remember a story exactly. They stood at the wharf where the city had for decades drunk its own lie and called it protection. A ring of stones marked the old place of sacrifice. Ash lived in the cracks, not fresh, but not gone. Elara set the oath fire in the ring. "Rivers are mouths," she said, not raising her voice because this was not that kind of conversation. "They are also ears, they remember. We bound this one. We fed it wrong. We asked it to be a wall when it wanted to be a way." She looked at the faces. Dozens now. Hundreds at the edges. Kale beside her, still as a mooring. "I will open a song," she said. "You will carry it. Not all at once, not loud. Around names and work, and promises that have weight. The river will learn what we mean when we say keep." The seer's eyes were narrowed the way one squints at light-off water. "Careful with the names." "I know," Elara said softly. She did not step into the circle. She stepped beside it, touching one stone with 2 fingers. The second heartbeat tipped forward, a horse feeling the bit and accepting it. In her mouth, the first note was not a note, it was a breath with edges. She sang her mother's name first, not the name the court had used, the name from a kitchen in a storm. Then the names of queens who had bound and unbound Nymeria last, because beginnings need an end to lean on. The song swelled like a tide that had learned patience. Briska's voice came in the rhythm of water carried in shoulders, Garin's turning wheels, Notch's, quick and thin as a sparrow's, skipping over the surface, catching and carrying more voices. Fishermen, with the old call to nets, turned into a promise to mend what they had torn. Midwives, breathing with the beat of a city's belly. A noble, perhaps more than one, murmuring vows with teeth gritted, because pride can carry a tune if you threaten it with silence. Elara did not pull the veil. She opened the door in her mouth just enough to let it hear. The oath fire bent like a reed. The river lifted 1 inch, then another, until a soft slap of water kissed the lowest stone. And the hunger? It watched. It did not slick up her bones. It did not lunge. It lay like a wolf, recounting new rules and deciding, for now, to honor the work of a pack. "Name your dead," Elara said when the round had turned 3 times. "Not to call them back, to show the river what grief sounds like when it is kept and not spent." The woman from the square stepped forward. Her boy clutched her cloak and for the first time opened his mouth. He whispered his father's name into the seam between water and air as if he were placing a coin on a tongue. The river took the shape of the name and did not swallow. It held. It learned. Names fell like small stones. Each one made a ring that met another and another until the surface wrote a treaty. Then something moved under the piers that was not current. Shadows braided, not the old hunters, those mustard torches of a bad god, but something unstitched. 3 figures, tall, slick with river, faces made of mica and silt. When they stepped, minnows flicked in their ankles like sparks. The crowd hissed but did not break. Kale's hand was on his sword and off it, choosing, then ready to choose again. Elara did not draw steel. She reached into the bowl and scooped the oath fire into her palm. It sat there without burning. It tasted rain and river and city and put its chin on her lifeline. Interested, the first of the river figures bowed. Its neck creaked like reeds in wind. "Daughter of 2 mouths," it said in a voice that was flooded cellar and winter thaw together. "We have eaten wrong food. You sing different, we listen." Elara bowed back. "Will you unlearn?" "Teach," said the river. All 3 of its mouths moved at different speeds and arrived at the same word. She lifted her hand. The oath fire's small light painted the stone ring with a wet sheen. "No more throats," she said. "No more royal blood for bargain. If the levy is taken, it is taken from those who pour poison. If the passage is barred, it is barred for those who carry chains." The figures turned like herons to look at the tanners gathered near a pile of staves. The tanners flinched and nodded and did not argue again about pits. The noble in silk smoothed his sleeve and tried to look river-colored. "What do you give?" the river asked. Elara blinked. The question surprised her. "Give? Rivers do not stop because told," the figure said, and laughter ran under the word like trout under foam. "Rivers stop when fed a rock. We want songs, not just names. Work songs, net songs, wheel songs, every dusk until flood." Elara's mouth opened on a laugh she had not expected to own tonight. "We can pay in songs, pay in hands," the river said, tilting. "Pull reeds where we choke, stack stones where we run too fast. Do not make priests do what children can learn." It pointed with a ripple to the boy Notch, who stood with his string of beads held up as if measuring a new distance. "That one knows distances. He will mark banks." Notch nearly swallowed his tongue. Then he straightened until his ribs creaked and nodded solemnly. "Yes," he said. The river looked at Elara again. "You carry a wolf." "I know," she said. "Do not feed it the names," the river said. "Give it winter. Teach it to sleep." "How?" She hated the hunger for asking. "Make it tired," the river said, amused. "Work it. Give it oaths to carry until its back grows strong enough to stop wanting backs to break. Elara lowered her hand. The oath fire settled with a small, pleased sigh into the bowl again, as if being a suggestion had been enough of a journey for one night. Then we have covenant, she said. The river bowed water, finding an old groove and appreciating that it still fit, and slid backward until it was only river again, brown and wide and thinking. The crowd did not cheer. They breathed. Someone began to hum the round again. A woman laughed and cried at once, and no one told her to pick one. The noble in silk rolled up his hem and waited with his servants to haul reeds. Garin set his back to a log and grunted, and a boy on the bank counted in a rhythm the water seemed to like. Cale exhaled a long breath as if he had held it since the first note. "You could have drowned us," he said. "I still could," Elara said, and the admission was a door she chose to leave open among friends. "But I think the river prefers company to ghosts." They stood until the bats finished their writing and the stars decided to read it. The seer spoke with the river under her breath in the language of old maps. Morrigan argued with a piling and won. The boy, Notch, fashioned a line of beads into a measuring cord by tying a knot for every 2 strides, and looked at it like a blade he had earned. When the square had been emptied of the day's cases and the wharf filled with work for tomorrow, Elara and Cale walked back up through streets shining with damp. The city smelled of wet rope and cooled pitch, and something not yet named. At the palace gate, the guard on duty, one of the plain leather men, touched fist to chest and said, without irony, "Good evening, lady." The title felt less like a chain and more like a handle one could lift with. They crossed the threshold. A corridor made of shadows and moonlight unrolled ahead of them, the saints in the broken windows quiet in their frames. The crown sat where she had left it, ear pricked, teeth tucked. They reached the hall outside her chambers, and the quiet between them shifted. Not absence, not habit. Something built today by hands and songs. "Elara," Cale said. She turned. The candle between them made a small, brave flame. "If I asked," he said, steady as a dock post in storm, not as captain, not as anything taught to kneel, only as Cale of the riverbank, "would you let me hold you until the second heartbeat remembers the first?" The hunger stirred, not with teeth, with a tired animal's curiosity. "Is there warmth?" Elara stepped closer. "You are asking me to be a woman in a room," she said softly. "Not a river, not a crown." "Yes, then I must say 2 truths," she said. "I want that, and I cannot promise I will always want only that. When the dark is loud, I might want to open and let it sing through my throat, because it promises to carry weight I cannot." He nodded. "Then I will be louder." She laughed, and the sound frightened nothing. "Do you make oaths of everything?" "It seems to be the fashion," he said, and a smile cut his grief into a shape it could live with. She touched his wrist. He turned his hand so their fingers learned one another without rush. The wolves inside her bones lowered their heads near the fire and tucked their noses under their tails. They were not safe. They were not asleep, but they were warmer than they had been, and the night had fewer teeth for it. They did not go into her chambers. They sat on the floor in the corridor with their backs to the cool stone and their shoulders touching. The candle burned down to a thumb. Somewhere below, a woman with patched cloak dreamed a dream with water in it that did not end in drowning. On the river, a boy counted beads in his sleep. In a crypt below the crypt, a man who had been unmade lay as still as a word that has chosen not to be spoken again and was at last honored for that. Elara woke before dawn to a change in the air, the sort of change that makes ravens complain. Cale slept, head tilted in a soldier's distrust, one hand still near a knife because habits keep men alive. She stood very quietly. The veil listened. The second heartbeat was steady, wary. It told her the city was holding under a new story. It also told her where the story thinned. On the throne, on the empty cushion where she had not put the crown, something gleamed. Not light, not shadow. A thread of glass laid like a hair from the mirror hall to the step. Elara followed it. It led her to the mirror at the end of the last corridor, the one she had avoided since she tasted Nymera's voice in its metal. She stood before it and did not breathe until breathing was a choice. Her reflection was hers, silver-white hair mussed by a night on stone, eyes embered down, mouth tired and sure. Then the glass changed. Not Nymera, not the veil, a woman with her father's mouth and no crown at all. Eyes the color of the river when it has ice on it, and something moving under the ice that might be a fish and might be a rumor. "Little sister," the woman said. The word hit like cold water up to the waist. Elara did not speak. She did not move. Kale slept 20 paces behind. The city breathed. The river turned in its bed and did not wake. "Did you think he had only you?" the woman went on, amusement like a thin blade. "He learned to hide things the day he learned the word king." Elara found her voice. "Name," she said, because names were doors and she would not be the only one with a hand on this hinge. "Malin," the woman said. "Born on the night the priests broke a jar and pretended the smell was the moon. Raised in the quiet places where roads remember they were deer paths. I carry no crown. I carry a promise that is older than promises." "What promise?" "To finish what the first queens began," Malin said, and the river under the city shivered as if a wind had run its wet fingers over every ripple at once. "Not unbind, not flood. Replace." The candle's last inch went dark behind Elara. In the hall's hush she could hear Kale open his eyes the way a man opens a door with his hand already on the hilt inside. "Come," Malin said, smiling without warmth. "Let us see whether your oath fire burns as bright when the wind is not your friend." The glass stilled. Elara stood a long moment looking at her face and the stone behind it. The second heartbeat found a new measure and asked if she were ready to learn it. She turned. Kale was already on his feet. His expression asked and promised at once. "Elara," he said. "We have a sister," she said, and the word did not feel like kin at all. "And she comes with a promise." "What kind?" "He-man, the kind that likes to be the only mouth at the table." He flexed his scarred hand, the oath fire's pale river bend mark showing when his knuckles paled. "Then we teach her hunger to listen," he said. Elara nodded. Outside, the first bell lifted its voice. It sounded less like alarm now, and more like practice still, a city learning scales before the song. "Dress," she said. "Wake the seer. Find Morrigan. Tell Notch to bring his beads." And Kale. He paused in the act of turning. "Yes?" "If I forget my name," she said, the corridor catching the soft shape of the fear and not echoing it cruelly. "Say it like a prayer. Say it like a stone. Say it like you did at the river." "I mourn." He stepped close, put his forehead to hers, and spoke once in a voice that had built boats on mornings colder than this. "Elara." The second heartbeat bowed. They walked toward the day, toward the river, toward a mirror that had learned to grow a mouth, and toward a city that would decide once again whose voice to keep. Chapter 8. The Wind Against the Fire. They woke the palace as one wakes a house that has learned to sleep light, with a hand on the hinge and a breath on the flame. Kale went down the corridor at a soldier's pace that did not look like haste, and woke the seer with 2 words through a door that did not need knocking. Morrigan arrived already muttering to the iron in her bracelets. Notch appeared with his beads and a piece of twine, hair sticking up like river grass after a storm. Outside, the bells worked their new scales. The city turned its face toward the day to see which way it would go. "Elara?" the seer asked, reading the cold along the stone where Elara's palm had rested. "What came through?" "A mirror with a mouth," Elara said, "and a sister inside it." Morrigan spat into her palm and wiped the mirror's edge with her spit, which had always vexed glass more than any prayer. "Name? Maylin," Elara said. "A promise older than promises. She means to replace, not unbind. She likes one mouth at the table. Then she is kin to every priest who ever tried to put reins on a river," Morrigan said. "Where? The wind will not be her friend," the seer murmured, eyes going inward. "She will choose where breath is thin. The mirror hall." Her gaze slid to Elara. "She wants you to come with your fire." "Then we bring more than my fire," Elara said. "We bring the city." They walked with an escort of work rather than steel. Garin came, rolling a wheel with a cracked fellow, because he had learned that a broken circle can be mended if you keep it moving. Briska brought a pail and a length of rope, because ropes know mouths and pails know thirst. A singer from the river quarter joined them, with a voice worn smooth, carrying net. The noble in silk trailed again, this time without his crimson shadows, watching as if trying to learn the new game before it learned him. Kale paced on Elara's right, Morrigan on her left, the seer a half-step behind and above, like a thought that comes when one needs it. The palace breathed them in. The stained saints kept their eyes on their own work, as if to say, "We will not be drafted again into a war that uses our painted hands for knives." The corridor to the mirror hall narrowed, the way halls do in buildings that remember secrets. Notch's beads clicked, counting nothing and everything. "Listen," the seer said softly, when they reached the door. The air changed on the tongue, colder, cleaner, the taste of kiln and wire and the brittleness of a sky scoured by winter. Wind, though there were no windows. The sound of thin singing from a throat that had never needed air. Elara lifted the latch. The mirror hall had been made not to be entered so much as to be convinced. Today it stood open, hungry in a new way. Mirrors lined the walls and the ceiling, some straight as judgment, some warped to make true things look wrong and wrong things look right. Dust never gathered here. The room was full of quiet light that came from nowhere and everywhere. In every sheet of glass, Elara saw herself and not herself. The oath fire burned in its clay bowl like a pale star in daylight, smudged by the wind that should not be. Maylin stood at the far end. She wore no crown. Her hair was braided close to her skull like a net laid tight. The mouth was their fathers made for saying yes to power and no to softness. Her eyes were river ice with something moving under them that did not have to be a fish. "You brought a chorus," Maylin said. "I brought a city," Elara said. "A city is a mouth that forgets its own tongue when hungry," Maylin said. "I have seen them. I have walked roads that were prayers before they were trade. Your river will learn to beg again when winter comes. I offer something better." "What?" Elara asked. Maylin smiled without warmth. "Glass," she gestured, and the mirrors breathed. The air went thin enough to make a chest take notice. In every pane, images lifted like frost on a window when a child blows on it. Streets without filth, water clear enough to count coins at the bottom, faces that did not age beyond a sweet ripeness, loaves that never burned, babies who never died, kings that never lied because there would be no kings at all, only a lens, clean and bright and incorruptible, shaping what it saw into what it ought to be. "Replace the river," Maylin said softly, reverent as a believer, ruthless as an engine. "Replace hunger with angle. Replace story with law. Replace the mouth with a plane." Morrigan's bracelets clattered. "Glass eats heat," she said. "It is honest about its cold." "Cold is good," Maylin said. "Heat breeds rot. Your oath fire is a pretty stove for a village. I build cities that do not need stoves." Elara stepped forward. The wind curled around her ear with a voice like an emptied bottle. The second heartbeat lifted its head, uncertain. The oath fire quivered in the bowl as if deciding whether to bloom or crouch. "A river learns," Elara said. "It changes with what we sing to it. It will flood and fail us, and then carry us again. That is life. Your glass remembers only itself. It remembers shape," Maylin said. "Better than memory. You make oaths, I make measures. Stand here." She lifted a hand, and the nearest mirror flattened until it made the air around it seem crooked. "And speak your justice, and I will fix it. No drift, no wind, no wolves under ribs asking to be fed. A world of angles. You will never drown a man by accident again." Elara's chest tightened at the words, "Never drown a man by accident." Ronan, the river's newest covenant, her own nearly opened flood last night. She closed her eyes, the wolves inside her bones paced, curious, then keyed their ears toward the bowl, where the oath fire made a sound too small to hear with ears and large enough to be felt in bone. Kale's knuckles brushed hers. "What does it cost?" Elara asked, opening her eyes. Maylin's smile went genuine for a heartbeat. "Everything that cannot be seen from one angle." The mirrors behind Maylin shifted. A fisherman's hands, rough as old knots, smoothed into a diagram. A midwife's patience became a rule. Notch's beads fell into a line and snapped into numbers that did not sing. Garen's wheel stopped rolling and hung as a perfect circle without weight. The seer exhaled. "This is the oldest temptation," she whispered. "Not flood, not fire, certainty." "Cities die of certainty," Morrigan muttered. "Nothing rots faster than a thing that never doubts." Maylin did not look away from Elara. "I am not here to argue doctrine. I am here to see if you will step into your reflection and save your people from your appetite." "I have appetite enough to listen," Elara said, "but not enough to forget the street under my feet." Maylin's eyes cooled. "Then let us test your oath fire, sister. A wind, not friendly. See what holds when the air is taken." She flicked 2 fingers. The mirrors inhaled. Wind fell from the ceiling like a sheet, unseen and absolute. The oath fire guttered low. The bowl rang a small ceramic fear. The workers behind Elara reached for things that tied them to the room rope, wheel, each other. Kale widened his stance, found her shoulder in the gale without searching for it, and set his hand there like a weight used to hold down a map. "Breathe," the seer said, lips hardly moving. "2 beats yours, 1 the wolf's. Make it walk on your leash." Elara put her palm over the bowl. The flame leaned into her hand and steadied, an animal finding a cave. The wind she could not stop. The glass she could not break without making 1,000 knives. So she did what rivers do. She found a path. "Garen," she said, her voice thinner than she liked and truer for it. "Roll." He blinked. then grinned into the wind like a man who had known worse on a road in spring. He set the wheel rolling along the hall's edge, keeping it moving with both hands. "Briska," Elara said. "Rope." Briska threw one end to the seer, one to Morrigan, one to Cale, and knotted around the bowl's handles. "If the wind wants it, it will have to take me," she said through her teeth. "Notch," Elara called. "Count." The boy closed his eyes. His beads clicked. 4, 8, 12. He opened his eyes and looked at the glass. 16 mouths of wind. 2 stronger, 1 there. He pointed. 1 there. Hez nodded. "Elara," Cale said, and she heard the name like a stone in a river. She breathed. The second heartbeat paced with hers. The hunger watched, bored by wind. Good. Let it be bored by things that were not blood. "Maylene," Elara said, "will you turn the wind?" "No," Maylene said. "Will you?" Elara smiled and did not pour darkness. She took the Oathfire's small white heat and gave it work. She set it on the floor and traced around it with chalk. The seer handed her like passing a spoon. She spoke a word not for warmth but for obligation. The flame rose 1 inch and made a low, stubborn sound. It did not fight the wind. It refused to be impressed by it. A small domestic miracle. A stove, a hearth. A thing that cooks and boils and dries boots and holds a table's talk in the shape of dinner. The wind faltered around that refusal. "Again," Elara said, and Garin rolled, and Notch counted, and Briska threw her back into a knot. The seer murmured old mathematics. Morrigan told iron in the mirror frames that its job was to be a hinge, not a mouth. Cale's hand did not leave Elara's shoulder. It grew warm with work. The wind could not find its teeth. It went sullen and meaner. It tried a trick a priest's curse prefers. It hissed under the Oathfire's lip. "Lift," Elara said. They lifted. The flame did not go out. It sat in air like something that had decided it could be a little river if the river was being stubborn about attending to more dramatic business. The bowl moved along the chalk lines that became a ring, then a spiral, then a road that led out of the mirror's influence like a goat path out of fog. When the last of the ring closed, the wind had to choose, be outside or in. It chose out because it liked to be noticed, and nobody noticed it in the circle. The room exhaled. The mirrors gave back their small, practical light. Maylene tilted her head. "So," she said, "you can cook? I can keep," Elara said. "Can you keep the kind of oath that does not like knives? When a noble's petition turns into 100 coins under a table? When winter wants the river and the river wants your dead? When a brother comes back to a door and you wish you did not hear his hand?" Elara's throat tightened. The room suddenly held Ronan's shape and her mother's, and 100 names from last night that had slid into water without asking to be counted. "Yes," she said, "not always with a song, sometimes with hands, but yes." Maylene's gaze moved to Cale. "And when the wolf is hungry for his bones?" Cale smiled with a scar that had learned to be honest. "I've made peace with teeth," he said. "They are for tearing meat and saying names. I can be both. My Adi and Fums. Adi and my Un." Something like disdain flickered, then cooled. "You will fail," Maylene said to Elara, almost gentle. "You will drown a man by accident again." "Then I will admit it," Elara said, "and I will not pretend I meant to. Your glass will break and cut children on the floor, and you will pretend it did not because you cannot afford for the angle to be wrong." The mirrors behind Maylene went still. For a heartbeat, Elara saw something beneath the ice of her sister's eyes, a room with no door, where a young girl had been taught to make right angles with her mouth until it forgot to curve. "It is not you I come to overthrow," Maylin said at last. "It is the wolf." "Handy. Then come for me," Elara said. "If I open to it, bind me. If I lie, unmake me. If I forget, say my name with the voice of a river on stone. But do not make a world that kills laughter to have clean lines." Malin's mouth softened in a way that was not a smile. "You talk like a city trying to be a person. I talk like a tool. Tools win. People live," Elara said. They stood with the oath fire low, and the mirrors bright, and the wind sulking in the corners, like a dog that had been told it was not the point of today. The seer's shoulders loosened by a thumb's breadth. Morrigan found a new bad word and saved it for later. Notch counted to 16 and started again, because 16 was no longer important, and that pleased him. "Will you walk with me?" Elara asked. "Not behind a glass, in a street." "No," Malin said. "The wind is my street." For the first time she looked minus one weapon. "If you are queen of a river, I will be queen of angles. 2 empires, 2 maps. We will see which history writes with cleaner ink." "History loves mess," Morrigan said. Malin's mouth thinned. "History loves winners." She lifted her hand. A mirror shivered. The room filled with the taste of cold iron and breath, held in a mouth that did not believe in lungs. For a heartbeat, Elara thought of breaking every pane to rid the world of a woman who thought roads were more honest than feet. For a heartbeat, she knew the hunger would like that very much. She did not move. Malin stepped backward and upward and away, until the glass relearned its old trick of pretending to be only itself. Silence. Garin leaned his forehead on the wheel and laughed a sound that was not entirely sane. Briska sat on the floor and began to coil rope with the fierce neatness of a woman who did not like leaving ends out. Notch put one bead between his front teeth and swore, with the concentrated solemnity of 12, to stop doing that because it tasted like old pennies. Kale's hand slid down Elara's arm until his fingers found hers. He did not lace them. He let them lie side by side like 2 lines that had agreed to run together without forcing angles. "She will build a court of glass," the seer said, voice low enough to live in bone. "She will build roads that do not turn for graves," Morrigan said, more sour than afraid. Elara watched the mirrors until they were only windows into a room with dust that would never gather. "We will make a city that turns," she said, "and teaches its dead to be remembered and not used." On their way out, the noble in silk stepped from the pillar he had been holding up with his shoulder and bowed deeper than yesterday. "Lady," he said, the word now a piece of rope rather than wire, "I have work to show by dusk." "I will stand in the square," Elara said, and let him go without a chain. They reached the red fountain as the sun squandered gold on the river. The oath fire rode easy at Elara's hip, bowl warm. The bells were learning a tune that was nobody's and everybody's. "Say your name," Kale said quietly, close to her ear. She did not ask why. She understood. "Elara," she said. The wolves nodded inside. "Again," he murmured. She smiled and said it as a woman, not a mouth. "Elara." They crossed the square into evening with the city learning its own voice and the river listening. Behind them, in a hall of honest lies, a woman with ice eyes and a promise like a blade began to draw straight lines on a map and forgot, for a moment and then, on purpose, to leave room for rivers. And above all of it, the blood moon hung shy of full, as if choosing which world to light more glass or water, and found it could not help itself, and gilded both. Chapter 9. Still Tide. By morning the city had learned a dozen new ways to say "we will try." The riverbank swarmed with hands. Reeds came up by the fistful where they choked the eddies, and stone was stacked by children who argued about which sizes made the best steps for eels. Notch's bead cord had grown to a loop. He measured with an authority that made men twice his years step back and let him sight. Garin set his repaired wheel under a mill frame and taught 3 apprentices which sounds meant oil and which meant patience. Briska strung lines between rooftops and courtyards so wet cloth would not drip into alleys where old sickness slept. Elara moved among them with the oath fire banked on her hip, letting her throat rest, letting her hands learn again the geometry of buckets, knots, and the weight of praise that does not make a god. Kale ghosted a pace behind and a little to the left. He spoke seldom, and when he did, 2 problems solved themselves for the price of 1 sentence. The seer wove through the work like a thread in burlap, strong and homely. Morrigan argued with hinges and valves, and always won. By noon, rumors had outpaced the ravens. Someone had seen a road that did not bend where it ought, and the oxen had bruised their pride on it. Someone had reached for a pitcher and found water leaping to obey their hand before the pitcher had tilted. Someone swore that at the city's edge a woman with river ice eyes had stood on a rise of ground and blown, and the dust had lain down like a dog at her feet. "Elara," the seer said when the bells licked the hour, "we should walk the north road." "Why?" Garin asked, wiping axle grease on his apron and leaving finger bones of black. "Because wind comes from there," Morrigan said, chin tipping to the steady set of clouds. "And because roads tell you what kind of feet intend to use them." They took a small company, Notch with his beads and an arrogance he tried to wear like a tool, Briska with rope, Garin with a bar the length of his arm, 3 fishwives with arms like oars, the noble in silk, now in wool, which was a kind of bow. The oath fire rode calm, like a heart that had learned a new measure and wanted to see where it fit against the horizon. A mile beyond the gate, they found it. Glass. Not a mirror, not a pane, but a road poured smooth as a lake in winter and set harder than stone. It ran straight across the contour of the land, skimming ridges, ignoring dips, slicing an old oak at the ankle so the stump gleamed with a ring of frozen tears. Where cartwheels had tested it, they had left no ruts. Where hooves had tried, they had skittered and slid. Kale crouched and set his palm on the surface. "Cold," he said, "but not with wind. Wind insists," the seer murmured. "This forbids." Elara knelt beside him. In the glass she saw her face elongated. The river narrowed into a bright line, the sky pressed flat, and beyond the road, where grass should have sashed in a good breeze, stood a regiment of stakes, thin as reeds, tipped with slivers that caught the light without throwing it back. "Hooks," Morrigan said with distaste. "Glass can be barbed. You set these along your laws and catch anything that tries to jump." She spat, then reconsidered, then spat again. The spittle sat like a pearl and refused to sink. Notch made a sound and clapped a hand to his mouth. "What?" Elara asked. "I counted," he said, abashed, as if numbers were a shame in the field. 16 between each post, and 16 rows, and the wind has 16 mouths. She matched them. "Angles," said the noble softly, "not mouths." 16 is a way to trap a square," the seer said, eyes narrowed. "It is also a way to forget a circle." Elara rose. She could feel the wolves in her ribs shift, not with hunger, but with dislike. The oath fire warmed against the glass road and refused to accept its weight. She spoke low. to the city that carried her bones. She intends not to invade, Elara said, to replace, not armies, measures. You wake one morning and cannot turn right because the road insists left is the only way that does not squeal underfoot. You reach for water and it does not spill because spilled water is imprecise. You sing and the note snaps to a pitch that is not yours. What do we do? Briska asked. Make mud, Morrigan said with relish. Glass hates grit, Garin grunted. Mud I can do. He thumped his bar into the bank and levered earth until the road wore a smear. It looked like a teardrop on an altar. Elara put her palm to the oath fire and fed it a thread of breath. We do more than grit, she said. We give the road a purpose other than refusing us. How? Notch asked, awed and suspicious at once. We teach it to curve, Elara said. She stepped onto the glass. It did not want her. It wanted the version of her that would stand here and declare the line law. It wanted her to face north and be north. She set her feet at an angle and turned her head to look back at the gate, and the road's mind skittered, unamused. She was a river's daughter, and the weight in her bones remembered how to bend without apologizing. Sing, she said, and didn't bother choosing whether she meant the seer or the city. Briska found a work chant with a swing in it. Notch clacked beads in 3s and 5s. Garin's bar made a soft cadence on a rock. The fishwives hummed a lullaby turned oarsman. Cale did not sing. He thought Elara until the name had meter. The oath fire lifted a breath height above her palm. Elara spoke to the road the way one speaks to a stubborn foal, choosing what to ignore, praising what to keep. Left is sometimes mercy, she said. Right is sometimes work. She told it the story of streets that curved because an old tree had asked to be spared. She told it of detours made for markets and funeral cortege and secret kisses under balconies. Each story laid a grain on the slick logic. The road acquired grit that was not mud, narrative. The glass shuddered. A seam opened, not a crack a decision. The road bent by a hair's breadth. It was ugly. It was a mercy. Again, Elara said, breathing. And they did. And the glass bent again where a field wanted water, and again where a house wanted shade, and again where a boy's run to the river would be shorter if the path were less proud. Malene's wind came not with anger but with disappointment. It slipped over the fields and across the road and went a little astray at every bend like a letter opener losing patience with sealed envelopes. The seer's mouth quirked. She felt that. Good, Morrigan said. Let the cold notice heat. They returned to the city by a path that would have been shorter yesterday, and were content with that small loss. The oath fire was warm. The wolves inside Elara's bones were not sleepy, but they had laid their heads down. It would do. At the gate, a runner met them. A boy with blood dried at the corner of his mouth, where he had bitten himself not to stop. Lady, he gasped. The river, Elara was already moving. The company matched her pace without orders, because fear is a command that needs no trumpets. At the wharf where last night had learned to sing, the river had forgotten its lesson. It did not flow. It stacked itself in thin, clear layers, like a book whose pages refused to turn. Fish hung inside it like punctuation. Reed tips were caught mid-bow. A child had run onto the surface and stood 2 paces out, shocked into stillness by the fact that his feet did not sink. The rings of names from yesterday sat visible in the water like old bronze coins under museum glass. Back, Cale said, lifting the child bodily and setting him on the stones. The boy's face cracked. Tears came, hot and ordinary. "It's all right," Cale said. "We will teach it again. Still-tide," the seer said with a bleak sort of admiration. "She has frozen it without ice." "Glass remembers flatness," Morrigan growled. "She taught the river to recall it." The crowd pressed, murmurs turning teethy. The tanners huddled, guilty under no new crime, and 30 old ones. Garin swore, eloquent and brief. Notch stood on his toes and stared, his beads clacking an anxious tattoo. Elara stepped to the lip. The oath fire warmed her palm as if taking a breath before work. In the river's surface her face looked like a coin, stamped, dull, negotiable. Malin's voice rode the wind, not loud, not near. "Drown no man by accident now," it said, almost kind. Elara wanted to throw the bowl. She breathed instead, in 2 beats hers, 1 the wolf's. "Briska," she said without turning. "Bring me a rope. Garin, your bar. Notch, listen." "For what?" Notch asked, appalled by the idea that there was something to hear in a river that did not move. "For the sound it isn't making," Elara said. They brought her what she asked. Cale took the rope's other end without being told. The oath fire sat in the ring of stones like a cat on a sill, ears pricked. "Malin," Elara called. The name landed on the water and lay there like a leaf that did not believe in current. "Come watch. If you are a maker of measures, measure this." Wind combed the wharf and found no purchase on pride. A mirror at the far warehouse threw back a new angle and saw nothing it did not like. Malin did not appear. That was all right. Glass loved to stare. It would not be able to help itself. Elara stepped onto the river. 100 hands flinched and did not reach. 100 throats swallowed. A few men laughed in fear's voice. The child she had lifted stared, mouth open, as if she had become the dare he had almost died attempting. Her boots did not sink. The surface took her shape like a lie trying to make itself true. "Notch," she said. "Count me." 1, he whispered. 2, 3, 4. Elara took the 5th step with her heel rather than her toe and bent her knee as if the water had the right to be a curve. The river's surface resisted, then accepted the insult and filed it for later. "Garin," she said. And he waded out where yesterday that would have been a mistake and today it was a trick, until he stood beside her with his bar. "What do I do?" "Make a door," Elara said. He looked at the surface, at his bar, at her face, and found in those an instruction he could live with. He levered the bar down along the seam between 2 layers of water. The river squealed, a sound like a flute bitten by a butcher. The bar slipped and bit and held. "Briska," Elara said. Briska threw the rope. Cale caught the other end. They set it across the lever, a simple machine made of insult and stubbornness. The seer knelt and put a hand to the oath fire and asked it to consider being a hinge. The flame lengthened, thinned, became a pin, became an argument. "Notch," Elara said again. "Counting," he said, suddenly fierce. 3 more mouths here, 1 under, 1 is listening. He pointed to the ring of names. Elara looked down. The coins were not coins. They were circles asking to be keys. "Open," she said gently, to the names, to the round they had sung, to the promise that a dead man could be remembered without being dragged into a second death by use. The rings pulsed, once, twice. The 3rd time, the river skipped the stone of the oath fire flame as if it were a lark, and in the skip was motion. The layer under her heel shivered. Elara leaned, the way one leans into a boat launch. "Now," she said. Garin put his weight into the bar. Briska hauled. Cale's back bunched under his shirt until Stitches complained. The Oathfire sang a note of work that was not pretty and not ashamed. The river, affronted and educated, did a small, rude thing. It moved. The first layer slid, not far, an inch. Then the second. The third sighed as if remembering how breath was supposed to sound in a chest. Water lipped the stone and drooled a little. Fish, startled, wrote obscene words in bubbles and fled. The crowd's murmur sharpened into laughter and grief. A woman sobbed once, a good sob. Notch whooped and blushed furiously and pretended he had not. Wind met current and made a mistake. Malin's angle faltered. The road of glass under the water because there was one. There had been since the first queen lied, wavered. The river found it a poor friend and slid off. "Keep," Elara said. They kept. The door widened. The layers forgot themselves, remembered the ratty, generous thing they were made to be. Water shouldered water until the weight turned forward. The river did not thaw. It reconsidered. Men and women worked with their hands without being told to be poetry about it. Children brought stones because stones taught water the habit of steps. The noble in wool waded up to his thighs and swore at his own boots until they stopped being expensive and started being useful. On the far bank, a sound like a harp string snapped. The glass road that had crossed the old ferry landing found that a song had touched it in its sleep and had no answer. A hairline seam appeared, ran the length like a new thought, and stopped, unsure. Elara took one more step. The wolves under her ribs rose not with blood, but with a hunger for endurance. She fed them work. She fed them names. She fed them the taste of rope sweat and the lesson of ladders and the charm of a boy counting not because numbers have power, but because putting them in order gives a body something to stand on. "Malin," she called once more, less invitation than courtesy. "You cannot make a river remember an angle it does not consent to. It will spit until you call the spitting a miracle, and then you will be a priest." The wind came from the north in a single flat breath. For a heartbeat, the river's skin slicked again. Elara could have opened then. She could have poured the veil's hunger into the mouth that had refused to be a mouth and scoured the layer clean in a rush of black strength. She could have dragged men to their knees in awe and terror and called that covenant. She saw the path. Her bones leaned toward it, the way a man at the end of a long day leans toward a chair he has not earned, but will take anyway. Cale's palm found her wrist. "Elara," he said. It was not warning. It was her name spoken like a door that knows which way it swings and refuses to be tricked. She closed her mouth. She opened her hands. "Again," she said, and if the wolves inside her howled, it sounded like a work song. They hauled. The river swallowed the wind like a rough loaf and coughed politely. The child sobbing turned into hiccups, and then into a question about whether he could stand on the water tomorrow if he promised to come back. Briska told him yes and no in the same sentence, which is what a good city always tells a child with a dare in his pocket. When, at last, the current moved as if it had invented itself, Elara stepped back onto the stones. Her legs shook in that small, private way that says, "This costs something you cannot put back." The Oathfire licked her palm once and went domestic again, content to be a bowl on a ring of stones in a day that had been wrestled into evening. She had no desire to look for Malin, but the mirror on the far warehouse made the choice for her. It brightened, then darkened, then lifted a face that belonged to the same father and a different doctrine. "You will drown someone," Malin said. The voice was not cruel. It was certain, which was worse. "Yes," Elara said, "and I will admit it. Idmaya, you will fail on a day when admission buys you nothing." "Yes," Elara said again, "and the day after that, you will crack a child with your angle and say it's better to bleed than to bruise crooked." Malin's mouth wanted to smile, found no humor. "You called me priest," she said. "You are not wrong. And you called yourself river. You are also not wrong. 2 liturgies, 2 empires. I will build my court, bring your oath fire and your wolves when you think yours better." "Where?" Elara asked. "Where the city meets its oldest lie," Malin said. "At the veil's heart, where you broke and became." "The hollow is gone," Elara said. "The room is gone," Malin said. "The seam remains, twilight, when the blood moon likes to give advice." The mirror dimmed. Elara realized she was cold, not starved, not bleeding, simply cold, work cold, river cold. Kael lifted her hand. She let him. The seer rubbed her own knuckles as if to remind them they were not glass. Morrigan eyed the mirror, made a vulgar sign, and laughed without cheer. "Twilight," the seer said. "She likes meetings that think themselves omens." "Then let us make it a chore," Elara said. "We will bring rope and oil and bread. We will bring Notch's beads and Garen's wheel and Briska's bucket. We will bring a city that has learned not to kneel to its own reflection." "Shall we bring the crown?" Kael asked softly. She looked at him. His eyes, river stone and tired and lit with stubbornness, held her like the oath fire's warmth in a cold room. "Leave it on the arm of the chair," she said. "Let it learn to watch." Dusk gathered at the edges of roofs, tasting chimneys and finding them less interesting than yesterday. The blood moon rose early, or seemed to, as if curious. The river moved, slow and thinking, carrying doors and oaths, and a boy's string of beads that had fallen and been rescued and were now knotted in a way they had not been before. They ate standing up, bread with ash at the bottom and perfect on top, salt fish torn with clean fingers, apples cut with knives that had seen worse work. Elara drank water that tasted like an hour reclaimed and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand like a woman who had known fields and storms. When she looked at Kael, he looked back like a man who had built boats and put names on them that were not his own and was ready to ask for one someday. They walked when the bells considered dusk a kind of practice for night. Notch led with his beads because he had earned that right. The seer carried the bowl. Morrigan carried iron. Garen rolled the wheel even though there was no road, because circles like to be reminded they can move without permission. Briska came with rope. The noble came with nothing but his hands, which was also something. The hollow was gone, as Elara had said. In its place the earth had healed badly, leaving a long, pale scar that refused grass. It smelled faintly of old rain and newer promise. At the center, where the obelisk had bled light, lay a seam. It did not look like anything until you decided it did. Then it looked like everything that had ever argued with itself and lost. Malin was already there. She stood with her back to the seam, which is how one stands when one does not intend to be pushed. Wind made a quiet around her, not deference absence. It declined to exist in her shadow. At her feet a line of glass pins had been set, point down, as if the earth could be tacked into certainty. "You brought the village," she said. "We brought the city," Elara answered. "The same thing before it decides to lie," Malin said. Elara did not dignify that with a reply. She set the oath fire on the scar. The flame behaved as if stones were a table and tables were friends. The seam warmed the way a throat does when it prepares to sing something it knows it should not. Your terms, Elara said. Replace, Malin said. Your oath fire with a lens, your river with a channel, your wolves with plumb and level, your crown with a rule that does not require heads to keep it on straight. And if I refuse? Elara asked. Then I show your people the one thing they cannot refuse, Malin said. Ease? The word hit like heat in winter. Dangerous, because it was lovely. Kale's fingers found the back of Elara's wrist. She could feel the beat beneath his skin, not wolf, not river work. Promise, grief, that had learned to be a tool. She swallowed. My terms, Elara said. Walk the square. Step on the stones where names were sung, and tell me you will not break your own reflection to keep the angle true. If you can, I will listen to your lens. Malin's eyes flicked. For a heartbeat, Elara saw a girl with mud on her calves and frost on her lashes, and a book whose rules had been kinder than the hands that taught them. Then the ice reasserted itself. I do not kneel, Malin said. Then this is not your city, Elara said, and the oath fire nodded, an inch of agreement that felt like a wall with a door. Wind rose, sharp and exact. The seam quivered. The wolves in Elara's ribs tasted battle and lifted their heads, and she bent and put both palms on the ground, not to open, not to flood, but to keep. The blood moon cleared the horizon and found two sisters holding different fires on the same old scar. It did not choose. It gilded both. The city behind Elara breathed in and did not exhale yet. The way a crowd watches a rope walker step from one roof to another and decides, for a moment that might be a year, to share one set of lungs. Begin, Malin said. Begin, Elara echoed, and the seam opened its one honest eye to watch. Chapter 10. The Seam That Learned a Name. The seam opened like an eyelid that had been waiting for the word begin for a century. No light came out of it. No darkness either. It gave them nothing to fight but choice. Wind shouldered in from the north, thin and exact, combed the grass that would not grow, and folded itself into plains as if each breath were a page in a book Malin had already read. The oath fire answered with a breath of its own, short, domestic, insistent, the sound a kettle makes when it wants to be listened to. Elara stood with her palms on the scar and felt the second heartbeat take a step toward the first and stop, wary. The wolves inside her ribs lifted their heads and waited for her to tell them whether today they were teeth or warmth. Ease, Malin said again, not loud, letting the wind lay the word across the seam like linen. You will not need songs to keep order. You will not need oaths to keep men honest. I will make the angles that mouths cannot break. And when an angle must bend because a heart breaks first? Elara asked. It will not, Malin said simply, as if she had solved grief with a pencil. They moved at the same time. Malin lifted both hands. The air around her hardened into clear plains, a geometry of denial. Pins of glass rose from the ground, points up, tall as reeds, and linked by threads you could see only when they decided to cut you. Elara sank her fingers deeper into the dirt and called not for flood but for work. The oath fire spilled a thin white curve around the seam, chalk and breath and bone dust and the memory of yesterday's bread. The circle was not perfect. She did not apologize. Notch, she said, and he was at her shoulder already, beads in his fist. Count my breaths. 3, then 1. If I go faster, pull my sleeve. He nodded, chin set like a small door made for one strong knock and no more. "Garen," she said, "roll that wheel until it remembers circles aren't cages." He set his shoulder and grinned through his teeth. Briska looped rope around 2 glass pins and pulled them out of the ground with a farmer's contempt for ornamental thorns. The noble in wool stood as if he had discovered his hands the week before and was trying to use them to mean something. He held a post steady when it wanted to lean toward a lie. Morrigan spat into both palms and told the seam in a dialect older than Bee's that if it broke wrong she would salt it until it thought itself a road. The seer's gaze was on Maylene's fingers. She traced their intentions into the dirt with the blunt end of a nail and made counters out of dust. Cale stood to Elara's right, a half pace behind, a hand's width from her elbow. He did not touch her. He did not need to. Everything he was leaned toward her name. Maylene's first breath of work brought down a curtain of glass, the kind that doesn't shatter, only multiplies. Elara could see the city in it, thin and bright and obedient. The river in the pane didn't move unless permitted. The people stepped where allowed and did not stumble because stumbling had been removed from the inventory of possible verbs. "Look," Maylene said, and for a moment the voice carried the earnestness of a girl trying to show her mother a drawing. "No one drowns. Nothing swims," Elara said. The curtain lowered. The grass at its edge had become symmetrical. Elara stood the oath-fire bowl on the seam and spoke a word that had the weight of a kitchen table and the reach of a ferry rope. The flame licked the air and made a ring you could step into without asking anyone's permission. She felt the second heartbeat shift its weight toward her knuckles. "Do not beg," she told it. "We will persuade." The seam twitched. The ground likes being asked and hates being argued with. Maylene's pins hummed. Elara's circle warmed. Between the two, the old wound remembered that it had been made by women who had been trying to keep a promise and break a hunger in the same motion. The first exchange was small and cruel. Maylene twitched 2 fingers. A sheet of glass slid under Elara's circle like ice under a child's feet, looking for a fall. Elara did not stiffen. She bent. She made the oath-fire an ankle and her palms a knee. The circle flexed and became a brace. She gave way without giving up ground. The glass missed by an inch, by a principle. A murmur ran through the people, gathered on the scar's rim. Not a cheer, the sound a congregation makes when it realizes the hymn is harder than expected, and they can still sing it. "Do you see?" Maylene asked, eyes never leaving Elara's throat. "You can be graceful. You can be spared. Or you can strain and crack and call that nobility." And well down. Elara closed her eyes long enough to ask the river inside her to be still long enough to hear a lie properly. When she opened them, Cale was watching her mouth as if every word were a nail he meant to set at the right angle. "I will crack," Elara said, "and I will admit it. I will not call a crack clean just because it is straight." The second exchange had teeth. Maylene's hands pressed. The threshold between the sisters snapped taut as a harp string. Glass threads rose and hummed, and where they crossed, they made a mesh that would have cut a city into tidy squares. Markets kept from alleys, alleys kept from courts, courts kept from kitchens. The mesh would have saved babies from boiling water and kept knives from throats. It would also have prevented a woman from running to her neighbor at midnight with a bowl and a grief and finding the door already open. Elara lifted her left hand from the earth and reached instead for Cale's wrist without looking. His skin was warm and scarred where the oath fire had left its pale river bend. She set his hand calloused and promising on the ring's chalk. His pulse beat under her thumb like a metronome that understood boats. "Hold," she said. He held. The circle steadied. Elara lifted her right hand and placed it on the ground outside the ring. The veil leaned toward the seam like a wolf sniffing a trap. She let it smell. She did not feed it. A low, guttural sound rose in her chest and vanished before it could become a flood. The oath fire's light did not brighten. It deepened. "Briska," Elara said softly, and the washerwoman, who had kept more families clean with buckets and rain than any king with decrees, stepped into the circle and set her rope down in a coil that touched the flame on two sides and made an infinity out of ash and habit. The mesh faltered where it met the figure 8. It did not know what to do with a symbol that promised return and also asked you to rest. Story. Elara whispered to the seam and laid into it one. The night a mill keeper carried a stranger's child across floodwater. The morning a baker burned the bottom of bread to give the top away perfect. The hour a boy promised to measure banks and did, and his beads learned his hands better than his hands knew themselves. She did not command the wound. She told it what had happened near it yesterday and the day before, and asked it to decide whether it preferred a river fed on names or a pain that gave no reflections worth shaving by. The seam stirred. The ground does not think quickly, but it thinks honestly. It remembered bones, old ones, thousands stacked into bargains, and it remembered last night's round when grief had been counted without becoming coin. Maylin's mouth thinned. "Enough," she said, and the wind knifed in. It came in planes now, fast and clean, the way carpenters breathe when a cut must be true. It rucked the oath fire's smoke into lines and drew diagrams on the air with Elara's hair. The glass pins around Maylin's feet lifted and turned points outward. The curtain rose again, lower, heavier. Somewhere behind Elara a child screamed once and then pressed both hands to his mouth to trap the sound where it belonged. Elara felt the wolves stand. They wanted to meet angles with teeth. They wanted to drag the curtain into the seam and make the ground drink mirror until its belly ached and it learned disgust. She had learned to want that too. Kale's voice found her through the diagram of wind. "Name," he said, low and steady, "a dock post in storm." "Elara," she said, and it was not a spell, it was a handle. The wolves lowered their heads and became dogs waiting for a new job. She changed the shape of her breath. 3 of hers, one of the wolves, one of the rivers, borrowed and returned. She made a measure Maylin could not draw because it did not repeat evenly. A rhythm of mercy that broke the bar when it needed breaking and kept time when it kept life. "Garen," she said, "break the wheel." He looked at her, outraged. "I just mended." "Break it where the spoke was weak," she said, on purpose. "Then set it back." He swore with love in it and obeyed. The circle fell open and was truer for confessing its weakness. The mesh trembled because it had no space for confession. "Notch," Elara said, "count wrong." He blinked, then grinned like a sinner. 1, 3, 4, 7, 11. The glass threads sang dissonance. Music is a better law than lines. It knows what to do with prime numbers. "Briska," Elara said. "Spill water." Briska tipped her pail and made a small, honest mess in the ring. The oath fire hissed approval. The seam warmed under Elara's palms and then cooled, and the heat did not return to where it had been. It went somewhere easier. Maylin stepped forward. "Enough," she said a second time, and her hands came together, fingers pricking a shape that had the power of a name and the indifference of a blade. The curtain dropped to cut. Kale moved body, oath, love, as if the floor had become the deck of a boat in a hard gust. He stepped into the falling pane and set his shoulder to its corner and made himself the wrong angle. The glass screamed against his bone and did not pass. It gouged. It learned resistance. It hated him. Elara's hand shot to his back by reflex and found the place between blade and spine where vows accumulate. She poured not the wolf, not the river, but every small refusal she had chosen since dawn. Not to drown the bargeman, not to scald the tanners with their own water, not to call victory when what she had found was merely a way to go on tomorrow. It ran through him in a warm, steadying line and made his ragged breath even. The pain shuddered, then tilted, then rose an inch as if reconsidering the geometry of this world's spine. Malin's eyes flashed. "He will break for you," she said, and it was not a taunt. It was a theorem. "He will stand with me," Elara said, "and for himself." The oath fire flared a little, not theatrical, and the ring's chalk burned without smoke. The seam turned, and for the first time since the first queen bound it, it looked not like an injury but like a hinge. Elara took her hands away. The ground held. She straightened. The second heartbeat aligned with the first, because there was work left to do after this, and it preferred to do it without picking a fight with its own chest. The wolves, Saturday. They watched Malene walk. Elara said to her sister, "Step into the ring. Put your heel where Briska's water is, and your toe where Garen broke the wheel, and Notch counted wrong. If your angles survive, I will give you a street." Malene's gaze flicked to the people at the ring's edge, the boy with dried blood at his lip, the noble with mud on his knees, a woman with ashes on her skirt from the bread she had overbaked that morning and given away anyway. The wind around Malene's braids tightened and then let go, the way a ribbon gives up when hair insists on being hair. She did not move. "You asked me to kneel," she said, and there was a crack in her voice that did not belong to glass. "I ask you to be a person for the length of one step," Elara said. "Then you can be a tool again if you must." "It is always the people that break the tools," Malene said, and the wind, proud of itself, laughed. "Good," Morrigan said dryly. "That means they still fit in hands." Malene's mouth hardened. "I am not your sister," she said to Elara, to the seam, perhaps to the father who had put both their mouths on his lies and hoped one would obey. "I am the promise that does not need a mouth. No dior." And she lifted both hands and drew the curtain up and back like a general furling a banner before a retreat that is not an admission. "I will build elsewhere," she said, "where your river cannot bribe with names, where your city cannot sing itself out of duty, where the wind is not asked to smell bread to feel welcome. You will break children on the edge of your glass," Elara said, "but you will bandage with neat strips and tell them scars are tidy and therefore holy." Malene's eyes, river ice over something that might have been a fish, once held Elara's for a breath that could have been a winter. "When you flood," she said softly, "call me. I will bring a straight line, and we will save what you cannot." Elara's throat tightened. "I will call you," she said, because that was the law she wanted to keep, the one where you admit you cannot be all things and do not die of pride trying. Something in Malene's mouth wanted to be warmth and failed. She stepped back through the interlaced planes she had built and vanished the way a road vanishes into the limit of an old map. The pin sank, points up. The wind shrugged and went to look for wheat. Silence rolled out like a sheet clean enough to sleep on. Then the city remembered how to breathe. Someone cried, someone laughed. Someone asked whether the oath fire would mind if they cooked eels on it tonight, if they promised to wash the bowl. The seam did not close. It settled under the ring like an old scar that had decided to learn weather without making a meal of it. Elara bent and lifted the bowl. It was warm and heavy and smelled faintly of flour. Her legs shook with the bill for what she had spent. Kale put his palm under the bowl for a step, not to take it, just to share the weight until her hands had remembered they were hands and not hinges. "You stood," she said. "You bent," he said. They looked at each other like two boats at a dock at slack tide, surprised by the way the rope had not needed to be taut for either to feel held. The seer huffed out a breath that could almost be called a laugh. "You two can ruin a duel," she said. "Praise be." Notch burst into speech as only boys at the edge of men do. "I counted wrong and it was right. I mean, no, it helped. Can I, should I do? I always count wrong now." "Sometimes," Elara said gravely, then ruined it by smiling. "When someone is trying to make your feet march in fours and you know the road needs fives." Garin wiped his eyes with a hand that made a smear of grease like a new constellation. "I'll fix the wheel again," he muttered, and the apprentices near him snorted tears. Briska squeezed Elara's shoulder once, hard enough to leave a thumbprint on bone. "You spill in my house," she said. "Any time, I'll not scold." The noble in wool bowed badly and with sincerity. "Lady," he said. The word had ceased being a chain. It had become a direction. Morrigan crouched and pressed 3 iron nails into the ring where the chalk was thinnest. "For forgetfulness," she said. "Not hers." She jerked her chin at Elara. "Yours." She meant the city. Dusk gathered fully. The blood moon lifted with a look of someone who had invited 2 guests to the same dinner and was proud of the table for not breaking. The river whispered nearby, not asking to be heard, only continuing. Elara let the second heartbeat match the first and did not pretend that would be permanent. She did not want permanent. She wanted a rhythm she could return to, a dock she could find in fog by smell and by the sound of someone cursing softly as they tied a cleat. "Home," she said softly to Kale, and meant the palace only in the way one means a roof when one has learned the shape of a city. They walked at the pace of people not being chased. The crown waited on the arm of the throne, ears pricked, teeth tucked. It did not reach for her. It had learned to watch. Perhaps one day it would learn to listen. In the corridor outside her chamber, they paused. Habit, desire, fear, and fatigue arranged themselves without quarrels. Elara set the bowl on the floor. The small, homely fire licked the air and made the shadows soft. Kale looked at her the way men look when what they want is not possession and not rescue, only permission to be present at the weight of a person's name. "Ask," she said, because words were the work. "Will you let me hold you?" he said, steady as a dock post, "until the second heartbeat forgets to count the distance between us?" She laughed with more relief than grace. "Yes," she said, then quieter. Honesty learning to be a habit too. "And if one night I remember the distance and want to walk in it and be terrible and large, will you tell me a story small enough to bring me back?" He stepped close. His hands were scar and oath and life. He framed her face the way a craftsman holds wood he loves. "I will tell you about a boy who counted wrong because the river needed it," he said. "I will tell you about a woman who broke a wheel on purpose. I will tell you how your name sounds when it is said like a stone and like a prayer and like 2 hands setting a table." She put her forehead to his and breathed the measure they had made at the seam. 3 hers, 1 the wolf's, 1 the river's. The wolves lay down, the river turned in its sleep and smiled a little. If rivers smile, they did not go to war in that corridor. They did not go to bed for victory. They leaned into each other until the day's geometry stopped needing solutions and became the kind of math one does with bread, knives, and mouths. In the morning, Elara woke to bells practicing a tune that was no one's and everyone's. The oath fire had burned low and polite. The second heartbeat had taken up the first's rhythm without argument, for now she stood, stretched, and set the bowl back on her hip. In the square, cases waited. A fisherman who had netted a log that looked like a drowned saint and wanted to know whether to carve it or bury it. 2 sisters arguing over which of them owned the right to sing at their father's funeral. A tanner who had kept his levy and come to give it back. A boy with beads and a new scar on his shin who wished to submit a plan for marking flood lines on doorposts. On the north road, the glass bent in 3 places that had not been planned and still got men where they were going. Downriver, in a city that had not said its name aloud in a long while, a hall of crystal took shape, with its doors aligned to the wind and its windows polite to stars. In its mirrors, a woman with river ice eyes practiced saying mercy without hearing her mouth curve around it. She did not kneel. She designed. At twilight, Elara stood again on the wharf and sang not prophecy, not law, names, work, promises that could be broken and mended and were truer for the mending. The river held them as if it had hands and let them go as if it had learned manners. When she finished, Kale said her name once, and she answered like a house with its door unlatched. The city answered too, in the stomp of boots on alleys, the slap of water on stone, the call of ravens who were learning to enjoy quieter nights. The seam at the heart of the world did not close. It learned the word hinge and chose to hold